Yeah, well, I'm telling you okay, as you guys make sure so much, it's just less hassle using a Linux build. So I switched everything over. We shouldn't have the problems we're having before with the Windows, and it just slows everything down. It maxes out my CPU. It's just wretched. So I'm not gonna. I could share the screen chat if we want to. I'm just gonna do this as a regular Hangout. Not including the live chat, but I'll pay attention to it. But I thought we were going to talk a little bit about epistemology, because one of the things that I wanted to get into a little bit without going into too much detail, because I have something I've written on this, was street epistemology. And I wanted to get people's kind of opinion on street epistemology, what they think. Have you, anybody dived into that?
I actually have not even heard of that. I'm sorry.
Street epistemology is basically where it's usually atheist will go out and they'll talk to somebody and they say, okay, I'd like to have a conversation with you about your beliefs. You can pick any belief that you want, and we're going to just talk about it. And they try to see if that belief is justified, right? If the person has rational reasons to hold that belief.
And it usually occurs either in public sites or college campuses.
Right.
So that's why most people probably aren't going to be really familiar with it unless they are, roaming around the streets in the middle of the day, or if they're at a college campus, again, during college hours. So most people don't know.
Or if you're actually dumb enough to stop and talk to these people.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it is somewhat of the Socratic method. However, I and other people that I've talked to so far have a lot of reservations about it, which we will address at another time. I'm not going to go into the details of the reservations because I don't want to appear to be negative, because I've talked to Anthony, what's his last name? God dang it, I can't never pronounce his last name. Madagascar. What's Anthony's last name? The one that actually does these things.
No clue.
Nobody. Somebody in the live feed will know. Ozzy knows it, but I mean, he seems like a really nice guy, and I want to be as fair as possible, but I cannot be honest with myself and not say that I see a lot of issues with the street epistemology. The position, I get that. Okay, and I think everybody should have justified reasons for believing things. I don't think reason to, or whether it be evidential, pragmatic, whatever. There needs to be some kind of reason that you feel that your belief is justified. Yeah, I'll put the link in the live chat. Oh, let me turn on cameraman first. Okay, there we go. So, I mean, since your field is epistemology, what do you want me to call you, MJ?
Yeah, you can call me MJ if you want. I could, if I could preface my, I have a master's in philosophy, but if someone says that, I mean, the subject matter is so broad. I mean, I had to read epistemology, of course, to get my degree, but I didn't write my thesis on epistemology. I only took 3 classes on epistemology. But, I mean, I could go as far as I can. But
that's fine. It's way more than anybody else in here.
Would be probably more equipped than me.
So, I mean, what do you first of all, can I ask what's your epistemological theory that you kind of hold to? I
went to Notre Dame, so what's really kind of pushed on us, but I try to be very critical about it, because I did not want to get sucked into the planning a cult
when I went to epistemology.
But I guess I would be an externalist. I do believe that warrant is that ingredient, which when you add to true belief, it turns into knowledge. And okay.
So you hold to justified true belief, and you hold to be performance.
Kind of stay away from. Oh, I heard your voice. I'm sorry. I think I cut you off.
That's not fine. It's fine. I think we got a little lag here, but I just don't know if on my end. I don't think it is, but I was going to say you hold to justified true belief and reformed epistemology. Then, if you're obviously
see, this is where it gets tricky, and I hope I get the nomenclature correct. I don't hold to justified true belief.
Okay.
Justification, if I remember correctly, has deontological overtones. Deontological overtones basically is this: you'd be violating your epistemic duties if you didn't go along with the evidence or something along the lines of Clifford.
Okay. So deontological means relating to duty. right? And Clifford's principle is basically saying that you should never have any belief that you should never hold at any time, anywhere, a belief that doesn't have sufficient evidence, right?
Right, and the specific application of that would be evidentialism or something like that. Maybe Ozzy could make sure I'm getting that right. He's got to turn on his mic, though.
Sorry, I just joined, so I missed the question.
Oh, we were sussing out his epistemological approach to things. He said he doesn't hold to justified true belief, and he finds as a theological there's something about justified true belief that holds to duties, which he hasn't got into. Why I don't know yet. I was kind of curious.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I don't subscribe to justified true belief.
I don't either. I go to argument, but
well, I don't think anybody does anymore, honestly.
What do you think about reliable true belief, though?
It's kind of thrown out there as that tripartite definition, but it's pretty much ever since Edmund Gettier published that stuff, people have been, their different projects have been either responding to it, supplementing it, or different knowledge first approaches and things like that.
But there's no one theory of truth that works completely. They all have some problems, right? Even with the Gettier problems.
It's a theory of. Sorry, Steve.
It's a theory of knowledge.
Theory of knowledge, yeah. Theories of truth are like a whole other area.
Yeah, I know. That would be more.
No, I know you know the difference. It's just
yeah, theory of knowledge. That's right. Well, that's why.
And then I think I
hold a reliable truth.
Externalism, and I don't know. Do you adhere to some form of externalism, Ozzy?
Yeah, I'm an evolutionary reliabilist, so I am an externalist with respect to the concept of justification, and I don't know what else to say. I mean, I reliably produced true belief, I think, is the best account we have of empirical knowledge. I think that definition, that's what, when people talk about JTB, justified true belief, or reliably produced true belief, those aren't theories of knowledge, those are definitions of knowledge, and those are the definitions that I think best capture what we're talking about. And I think reliably produced true belief captures things much better than JTB and isn't subject to the Gettier problems in the same way.
And
it has its own problems.
Right, but that's what I hold to as well. But what happens is, like, somebody just actually, I think it was this morning. Basically out there, theism or reformed epistemology, but they just pair it out there. Well, knowledge is justified true belief. It's like that's an axiom, as if that is a fact.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about that is that most people who are into reformed epistemology are actually externalists and reliabilists. And so I hear a lot of Calvinists and presuppositionalists espousing reformed epistemology, and then they'll trot out things like the JTB definition of knowledge, and they will sound like externalists with the how do you know that, how do you know that, how do you know that, which is completely wrong. It's not reformed epistemology. They ought to pick up something by Alvin Plantinga, for starters.
Right, yeah. I was going to say
any of his books on Warrant.
Exactly. We had to read all three. But basically, I was thinking more along the lines of presuppositional apologetics, which usually goes along with the how do you know, and then they switch it, and they switch from an internalist kind of approach to an externalist approach without people who aren't familiar with epistemology don't know what's going on.
Right.
Well, I mean, the proper way to respond back to that how do you know question is just that the only thing motivating your how do you know question is you're coming from an internalist perspective, which I reject.
Right, and which they reject too.
Well, but that's when it gets into the theory of truths, like foundationalism, right?
Well, no, these are still theories of knowledge and justification. Right?
But he had but he's talking about where he forms his epistemic framework from. Isn't that would be somewhere? Well, like my theory of truth is foundationalism, and Sokka's is coherentism. Is it? I mean, they seem to be related in that regard.
And how reductionalism is.
There are theories of truth and there are theories of knowledge, and some of them, and we sometimes use the same word for these two different theories. So you can have a foundationalist theory of knowledge, you can have a coherentist theory of knowledge, but you can also have a coherence theory of truth, and these are different, right? I mean, yeah, justification. So what we're talking about here, MJ and I, what we've been talking about here is internalism and externalism with respect to theories of justification.
Okay.
So when a person is saying, how do you know that? How do you know that? When the cyclones, I mean, more informed presuppositionalists don't play that game. They don't go for that script. But when you're talking to a cyclone presuppositionalist, who's running the how do you know that script on you, what they're doing is they are insisting that in order for you to know a proposition P is true, you have to have a justification that P is true. But in order for that justification to be worth anything, you'd have to know that the justification itself is true. Right? And the idea is that in order to know something, you have to know that you know it. And so you have to have justification for your justification for your justification. And specifically, they have what's called an internalist conception of justification when they're asking that question. They're insisting that you, the agent, the cognitive agent who is believing and purports to have knowledge, you must be aware of the reasons. They must be internal to you. They must be available to you, at least in principle. They must be accessible to consciousness, at least summonable to consciousness in principle, if not in that very moment. An externalist, but by comparison, rejects that and says, no, that leads you into an infinite regress. And if that's the case, knowledge is impossible for everyone. Even a god couldn't know things if that were the case.
Is that related to the KK principle? Like, yes. if I know a proposition is true, then I know that I know the proposition is true, that I know that I know that I know that I know that. Is that what it's related to?
Yeah. So the KK principle is informed by an internalist conception of justification. It's this idea that justification has to be something that is consciously or at least accessible to the agent. It has to be something that they can represent to themselves before their mind and ideally articulate, but not necessarily so. But at least it has to be something that occurs in the mind and is accessible to them mentally, which serves as justification. It has to be internal to them, right? It's like they're aware of it, okay? And of course, if you think that that's the case, and that's part, and that you have to know that you know, then you're going to end up in this regress. An externalist, by contrast, says, no, that doesn't work that way. That's not what knowledge is. Knowledge would be impossible if those conditions were to be insisted upon. No, rather, for you to be justified in your belief, it just means that your belief is occasioned by the state of affairs that you take to be true. So, for instance, I have a cup. I see the cup. So let's grant, for the sake of argument, that there is a cup. So the belief is true, and I have a belief. I do, in fact, believe that this is a cup that I'm holding in my hand here. Okay. And do I have a reason? Yeah, I can give a reason. I can see it, for instance. Okay. But the fact that I can say that I can see the cup isn't any part of the justification. Rather, the justification is that photons are bouncing off of this thing, passing through my retina, and occasioning a visual experience, a visual belief, in fact, that there is a cup here. In fact, the belief entails that this thing is causing the very mental visual experience that I'm having. So the idea of externalism, an externalist conception of justification, says it's not important that you be aware of the justification. There just has to be externally, objectively, a state of affairs that connects you to the facts such that your belief is caused by the fact. And if your belief is not caused by the fact, for instance, when you're dreaming, if you're dreaming you're being chased by a monster, there isn't a monster that's causing you to believe that you're being chased by a monster. There's no external justification there. That's why you can't know that you're being chased by a monster when you're dreaming, because you're not really being chased by a monster, and the belief is not caused by or occasioned by an external state of affairs. So there has to be some kind of causal connection between you and the state of affairs that you believe in. And that is not something you have to be aware of. So for instance, I see that I'm holding a cup here, but I don't have to have a theory of optics. I don't have to know anything about neurophysiology and have a whole theory of the psychology of visual perception, right? My dog can know that there's food in its bowl. My dog isn't thinking, isn't drawing inferences, doesn't know anything about visual perception and optics or anything like that, right? But my dog can still know the difference between when its dog dish is full of food and when it's empty. So your dog can know things on an externalist account. On an internalist account, the dog can't justify anything that believes to be true, right? And so dogs don't know anything, right? They might have beliefs, but they can't know anything. Whereas I think, of course, dogs know things, right? And you can fool them, right? You can change things up on them, and visual illusions can be done on people. And how does a visual illusion work? Well, the reliable process that normally brings about the belief in the usual way is not operative here. So there isn't a reliable process. So the belief is not being occasioned in the right way. And that's why you don't know things. And that's why on a reliabilist view, on an externalist conception of justification, you can explain, we have an account of why someone who is seeing a visual illusion doesn't know what they're seeing. They're mistaken about what they think they see, like when they see a mirage of water or something like that on a hot day on a piece of asphalt, and they think they see water or something like that, right? We have an account that explains why that wouldn't be called knowledge, even though they're having a visual experience. The visual experience is not being caused by water. It's being caused by some refraction of hot air, that's moving in a weird way above the pavement due to the temperature of the pavement, right? So the idea of internalism with respect to justification is that the agent must be aware of the things that justify, that connect them to the facts. The externalist says, no, those factors just need to exist. They just need to be there. You know things when you stand in the right causal relationship to the state of affairs that you believe in, right? And so if your belief is occasioned in the right way, then you know what you think you know. But then people will say, well, hey, but how do you know that you stand in the right relationship? Well, now you're not asking me how I know that. You're asking me how I know some other thing, right? And that's a different question, and we can answer that, right? That's what we're talking about here. When we talk about internalism and externalism, we're talking about internalism and externalism with respect to the concept of justification. And that is typically seen as an ingredient in knowledge. On my view, the definition of knowledge I subscribe to, justification isn't even a part of the definition of knowledge. It's relevant in discussions about knowledge for pragmatic purposes, for the purposes of persuading other people, and for the purposes of scaling my confidence with what I believe to be true. So it's important to have justification for those reasons, but it's not constitutive of knowledge. It's not an ingredient, a necessary ingredient in what we call knowledge.
So if you have an object that's producing something in the brain, an actual psychological conditional change, okay, because you're seeing something, you're saying, okay, photons are reaching this object or coming out, bouncing off this object literally, and reading your retina and your brain's processing this into you having an experience that you're seeing a cup, correct? Right.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a causal story to be told there.
Right. Now you would say that
it's the state of the idea, though, just to sum it up, it's the state of affairs. It's the fact that there is a cup here that is causing me to have the belief that there's a cup here, and the fact that there is in fact a true causal story there. That's why this belief happens to be knowledge. Whereas if I was hallucinating that there was a cup here, if I'm holding up an empty hand here and I'm saying, is this a cup I see before me? And so I can have the visual experience, but if I'm having the visual experience and the visual experience is not caused by a cup, then we would say, well, that's not knowledge.
Okay, and I get that. And from an external point of view, I can look and say, you do not have a cup in your hand. You're clearly hallucinating. You're not justified to say that you have knowledge. But from your perspective, you do.
You broke up there. You broke up there, but I think what you're saying is there. From my perspective, I don't know that I'm hallucinating, right?
Right, but you do believe either way that you have a cup in your hand because you're hallucinating. Right. That's what you believe in something.
Right. Yeah, in both cases, I believe I'm justified, but the idea is justification, according to the externalist, is an objective matter.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? So it's objective. It's not subjective. And so how do you know that? How do you know that is irrelevant. That's not what justification is. Justification is objective.
Even if you think you have a justification to think that you have knowledge of the cup there, it wouldn't matter because to an externalist, me looking at it going, well, you're not justified for that because you don't actually have a cup in your hand.
Right. But the idea is this. If I'm holding up my hand like this and I'm not holding up a cup, I'm just holding up my hand like as if I were holding a cup, okay? But I happen to believe, because I'm having a visual hallucination, that there's a cup there, right? And I say, well, there's a cup there. And why do I say that? I'm having a visual experience, and I believe that the visual experience is vertical and that it's caused by a cup. Now, if as a matter of fact it's not, then I don't know what I think I know. And you, if you're not having that hallucination, because we're not sharing a hallucination, you can see that I'm just holding up an empty hand here, and I'm drinking from a non-existent cup, right? You're going to say, Ajay, I got bad news for you. You're not justified, right? The point is this: while you and I might disagree about whether I'm justified or not, in such a case, I would be mistaken and you would be correct. The point is there is a fact of the matter about, in every case, whether or not a person is justified or not. And what makes a person justified or not on this kind of reliable process, externalist conception of justification, is that does in fact exist a state of affairs. Now people are going to say, but wait, how do you know though? How are you going to know that you know? We don't. Well, I reject the insistence that in order to know something, I have to know that I know it, right? I have a subjective justification, right? But it's going to be the objective character of the situation that's going to make it the case that I am justified, right? Justification on this view is an objective matter, right? Justification is what connects your belief to the facts. And if there's a break in that connection, right, then I don't know what I think I know. So it's all a matter of how you're related to the facts. If there's a reliable process, okay, between you and some state of affairs, and you believe that state of affairs is there on the basis of that properly functioning reliable process, then you know what you think you know. And if it turns, but of course you could be mistaken, but why does knowledge have to imply certainty?
And I think that's the thing that a preceptor actually tries to exploit, is that they want people to think that all knowledge has to be certainty.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean that's kooky, because I mean if they understood their own epistemology, their own externalist account of epistemology here, they would know that certainty isn't required. I mean, remember, there are certain things that they think that we can be certain of, right? But remember, the presupposition, I mean, forget the cyclones, they don't know what they're talking about, okay? But I mean, a proper presuppositionalist, not a cyclone now, is of the following view. The reason I can trust the reliability of the senses, for instance, is because there is a God who created the world, and he created us with our cognitive and perceptual faculties. So it's not a coincidence that I form beliefs the way that I do. And as a result, because God created us with reliable processes, and it is God who guarantees that we have these reliable processes, God serves as the guarantor that our beliefs are generally reliable. Not perfectly reliable, not inerrant, right? So the idea of presuppositionalism is that they believe that a God is necessary so that we can have the kind of mortal, ordinary, fallible, uncertain knowledge that we do, right? I mean, presuppositionalists, when they look at something, I shouldn't be going around bragging, I see a cup and I couldn't be wrong about that, right? They're not. That's stupid. God is not in the business, according to proper presuppositionalists, is not in the business of making people experience certitudes all day long, right? That's not what the theory is. The theory is God created us and a world for us, and us with faculties that permit us to have perfectly ordinary knowledge of mathematics, which is analytic, and is where the proofs are demonstrable in a very different way than the way that we prove that all mammals, have mammary glands or something like that, right? Which is empirical knowledge, right? And so the idea is that God created us and the world such that we can have knowledge to the degree of confidence that it makes perfect sense to have, not certainty. Certainty is just not relevant here. Right? Now, they do believe that there are certain things that they can hold with certainty, certain facts about God, certain doctrinal things, certain dogmas of their religion, for instance. But the presuppositionalism, properly construed, does not claim that all knowledge requires certainty. Right? Presuppositionalism isn't completely stupid or anything like that. It recognizes the fact that people have fallible, uncertain, mortal knowledge, right? Not anything like the omniscience that a God would enjoy, and the complete certainty that a God would enjoy.
Well, on that token, I mean, for presuppositionists, they like to ask, can you be wrong on that kind of thing? And that does go to the Psi 10 thing. But from a presuppositionist's point of view, because we were able to rationalize and have thought processes from God, could you somehow turn it on them and say, well, how do you know that that's the case? I mean, are they just taking it as a precept saying, let's assume that is the case? Or can they actually say, well, if
you broke up there, Steve, but I think I know.
Whether it's not, they don't even allow that to be a possibility.
Yeah, you broke up there, but I think I got the gist of your question. um, when a presuppositionalist is saying that they know something, and they know it because God is the guarantor of their beliefs, they're not actually supposed to be saying, I couldn't be wrong about that. What they're supposed to be saying is, look, the general, ordinary, mundane, perfectly fallible reliability that we do enjoy, that is caused by God. It's not an accident. It's not a product of natural selection, okay? It's not happenstance, okay? We are designed, right? Our organs have a proper function. They have a telos, okay? Hands are for grasping, and eyes are for seeing, and ears are for hearing, and brains are for thinking and drawing inferences and doing induction and things like that, right? That's not an accident. Where God, they believe, created us with those capacities, and fallible as they are, okay? So there's no infallibility or inerrancy that's supposed to result from these cognitive faculties. God didn't create us with those kinds of faculties. He created us with these very limited faculties, right? What happens, though, is the pre-suppers of the Psi-10 Rugenkate variety, the cyclones, they're confused. They don't understand that this is supposed to be an externalist conception, right? I mean, I think for me, I'm an externalist. I'm a naturalist kind of externalist. I believe that the causal processes are all perfectly natural, but they think that the perfectly ordinary causal processes that allow us to see things is caused by God. So they have a sort of an extra step, this supernatural step, right? God ordained it thus, right? Made it so. Okay. But what happens is the cyclone types, they don't understand the difference between internalism and externalism. And so what happens is they will ask you, well, how do you know that? How do you know that? And then if you turn it around on them, then they will fall into externalism and say, oh, no, God serves as the guarantor. And then you say, yes, but how do you know that God serves as a guarantor? And they'll say, well, no, it's just a presupposition, right? I don't call that into question. That's my starting point. I don't have to have a defense of that, right? But they won't let you be an externalist. They will deny that you're externalism. When you try to make that move and say, well, listen, I think that evolution and natural selection has resulted in these reliable cognitive processes and perceptual processes, right? And that's why our beliefs enjoy the degree of reliability that they do, right? Not perfect reliability, but to the degree that we have it, right? That's why. And this is an objective external process that I don't have to be aware of. They think that when we say something like that, you have to be aware of it. They insist on internalism. You got to justify your justification of your justification of your justification. And if you try to do that to them, they say, no. When it comes to God, I don't have to justify anything. And then, but if you can be consistent with them and say, well, listen, if you're going to apply an internalist standard of justification to me, I'm going to do that to you. And I'm going to demand that you justify how you know that a God exists and that God is the guarantor of the reliability of your senses and your inferential practices and so forth, right? And they won't be able to do that, obviously, right? They're not going to be able to satisfy that. They're going to end up arguing in a circle, right? So yeah, I think it's perfectly okay to turn the tables on them and say, listen, if you're going to insist on internalism, and that one always has to be able to answer the question, how do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that? Then you're going to be stuck on the same endless treadmill that you're trying to put me on, right? If you're allowed to be an externalist, right, and reject the KK principle and reject internalism, then great, I can do that as well. I can be an externalist. I can reject the KK principle. I can just do that without positing a God. And then what the argument has to come down to then, if you're arguing with a reasonable person, is which is the better account? Is a naturalistic account better than an account that has a God in it, right? Which of these two competing externalisms, the theistic externalism and the non-theistic naturalistic externalism, which is the better account, right? But that's how the argument should go, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a better way to present it. I don't find that to be a dishonest way of approaching it.
No, I've had conversations with like really, sensible, informed presuppositionalists who understand a bit of epistemology and understand that they're not supposed to be playing the how do you know that game, right? I think what has happened is someone like Psi-10 Rugenkate as was impressed with certain apologists, Greg Bahnsen and others, and didn't understand any epistemology. And what he extracted from that was this script. And of course, the script is really great because it stumps people, and so it immediately is easy to export to a lot of people. Here, all you got to do is ask these intro philosophy 101 questions. How do you know that? How do you know that?
Yeah, and then annoy the shit out of them until they don't want to continue the discussion. That was the Site-10 approach.
Yeah, but it's very effective. It's very effective because I think the reason it's effective is because internalism is a dumb epistemology. I mean, there's a good intuition behind it. There's a reason why we have this intuition that you have to give justifications. But I don't think justification is in fact an ingredient in knowledge. I think it serves pragmatic purposes, both for ourselves as cognitive agents, but also intersubjectively between us. It's important that we be able to offer justifications as a condition of public assertability. But I mean, let's face it. Most people who pick up what's it called? How to answer the fool? How to talk to the fool? I can't remember. Site-10's got this pack of CDs or something that is basically a how-to on how to apply his version of presuppositionalism, right? And people who are picking that up and watching that are not getting any lessons in epistemology. What they're getting is a how-to on how to apply this script. And once they get this on board, once they start applying this, they're of course able to stump people, because most people don't know that there's this thing called internalism and externalism, right? And most people are accustomed to giving reasons when they're asked, why do you believe that? And most people think naively that one can always supply reasons. And in a way, a lot of people in the atheist and skeptical movement were sort of ripe for the picking here, because a lot of them sort of are in the grips of a kind of naive epistemology, epistemivism, where they think that none of their beliefs are unwarranted and all of their beliefs are, can ultimately be discharged by some kind of empirical justification, which is just hopelessly naive. But it made a lot of people in the atheist online movement and skeptical movement extremely vulnerable and susceptible to this kind of trap, because they didn't know enough philosophy to realize these questions are loaded. They assume theories of knowledge, things like the KK principle and the internalist conception of justification, that are highly, highly questionable, very dubious. And in fact, I don't know too many epistemologists who subscribe to the KK principle or internalism. In fact, practically anybody in the field of epistemology who subscribes to the KK principle, you have to know that you know to know that you know, and so forth. And internalism, they are invariably going to be people like Barry Stroud, right? They are real skeptics, like empirical, like hardcore skeptics, right? And I don't mean skeptics in the sense of the skeptic movement. These are going to be people who are going to go around saying, "Yeah, I don't think knowledge is possible," right? And I think
they're nihilists when it comes to like epistemic nihilism sorts.
No, well, not necessarily. I mean, Barry Stroud wouldn't be one of those, but I mean, if you want to read a good book on the subject, Barry Stroud actually from Berkeley, I think he's still there actually, but he wrote a wonderful book called The Significance of Philosophical Skepticism. And it's just, I recommend it to anybody who's interested in these questions. It's actually quite readable. It's a technical book, but it's actually quite readable. There isn't tons of formal logic in it or anything like that. Maybe a tiny bit here and there. And it's just a series of essays on this, where he explains the significance of philosophical skepticism. But most people who've studied epistemology, if they subscribe to things like the KK principle and an internalist conception of justification, will be the very people who tell you, yeah, there's no such thing as knowledge. Ain't no such thing as knowledge. Nobody knows nothing.
Yes, I can't ascribe to that. I mean, I think that knowledge is something that's possible, especially if you put it in context with something. If I say, look, within the scientific context, if I know this particle's spinning up, I know the other particle's spinning down. I know this. This is knowledge. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Well, I mean, that might be begging the question, though, against a skeptic, because they're going to say, well, wait a minute. How do you discharge this knowledge? How do you satisfy the justification conditions? You're going to have to, presumably, you want some account of how you.
Well, I can justify by showing the science.
Right, but you're going to end up doing things like, well, we did these experiments. Well, what is an experiment? An experiment is you undertake a certain action, you made certain predictions, you had certain observations, but all of those observations are right. The value of any scientific observation rests entirely on the reliability of your senses. If your senses were systematically deceiving you, if you're dreaming, for instance, that you conducted an experiment, I would submit to you that the value of your experiment is worthless, right? If you conduct an experiment in a dream, it's worthless, right? So a philosophical skeptic, a true philosophical skeptic, is going to say, listen, you don't even know that you didn't dream any of this, right? You don't know that any of these experiments that you're referring to actually happened.
Right, but I'm not.
You don't even know this conversation is happening, right?
But like I said, I'm not a philosophical skeptic, so they can say that all they want. But I don't want to.
But no, it's not enough to say, yeah, I don't share your position. You can say I don't share your position, but the skeptic is trying to pose a challenge to you. You're trying to say that there's a difference between an experiment in a dream and an experiment carried out in the real world, and that one has value and one is worthless. I think we would both agree on that, right?
Sure.
But then they're going to say, but you're not in a position to tell that you're not dreaming, right? And don't worry about lucid dreaming. That's not going to help you, because you can always have a dream where you think you're having a dream within a dream, where you think you're lucid dreaming.
Well,
but
didn't Putnam actually argue against that? Didn't he actually have an argument where he said, it is not possible we could be a brain in a vat?
Yeah, he's got a kind of semantic argument against that. Yeah. And I mean, and that's actually a very interesting argument. It's a transcendental argument, actually. It's a kind of transcendental argument. But I mean, that's actually a hard argument to articulate, and I'm not entirely.
It's not easy. No, it's not an easy.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely convinced that it's true.
Consigned constraints or something. But yeah, it's a linguistic type of thing that he approaches. But I know I don't have the live chat showing. So Atheist Ranger, he says, part of my ignorance. I said, what is epistemology? So maybe it's just actually start with the people a little more basic, because I think we're losing a lot of the chat. People are listening. Yeah. 75 people are watching this, and half of them are going, "What the hell is Ozzy saying?" Which is usually typical, but maybe we need to draw it down a little bit. I don't want to say dumb it down. Maybe, but kind of. I think we're going on an extreme.
Yeah, sure.
What is epistemology, Ozzy?
Okay, epistemology is a branch within philosophy that deals with questions concerning certain concepts like truth, concepts like belief, concepts like knowledge, concepts like justification, right? Concepts like verification, right? The philosophy of science, for instance, is sort of a subchapter within epistemology. So epistemology, episteme is a Greek word. It just means knowledge. And actually doesn't mean knowledge, it means something slightly different, but they have more than one word, words like gnosis and stuff like that. But so there are different branches of philosophy. There's moral philosophy or ethics, and there's axiology, which is value theories. There's philosophy of mind. There's metaphysics and things like that. And another branch of philosophy is called epistemology, and epistemology is just that branch of philosophy that deals with questions like, what exactly is knowledge, right? Well, I don't know. What is knowledge? Well, one old theory of knowledge dates all the way back to Plato. It was articulated in a dialogue, Socratic dialogue called Theaetetus. Sorry, escaping. I should know that right off the top of my head. But in the Theaetetus, there's this dialogue between Socrates and another fellow, and they talk about what exactly is knowledge. How are we to define knowledge? And they distinguish knowledge from true belief, right? Because we know that everybody can have beliefs, and they might be true, but if you happen to have a true belief about that it's going to rain, you decide to bring an umbrella on the basis of a magic 8-ball, I would submit to you that even if it turns out that it's going to rain, you brought the umbrella. If you brought the umbrella and believed that it was going to rain on the basis of a magic 8-ball, you don't know what you think you know. You got lucky, right? So in that dialogue, which is sort of the first work of epistemology in the history of philosophy, in the history of the Western intellectual tradition, there's the first definition of knowledge. That knowledge implies truth. You can only know something if it's true. You can't know that I'm holding a cup if in fact I'm not holding a cup. You have to believe that it's true. If I don't believe something, I can't know it. So knowledge is a subset of belief. It wouldn't make sense to say, I know this is a cup, but I don't believe for a second that this is a cup. That would be a contradiction, right? So knowledge is obviously some kind of subset of beliefs, right? We can have true beliefs, false beliefs, and beliefs that are justified. And so the third condition in the definition of knowledge that Plato gives us is justification. So the idea is that there are three ingredients in knowledge. A belief. First, there has to be a belief. The belief has to be true, and there has to be some justification for the belief. There has to be something that connects the belief to the fact, to the truth. Otherwise, it's not knowledge. If you just have a lucky, true belief, we don't consider that knowledge. It's just a coincidence. You just got lucky.
Like if I said it's going to rain tomorrow, and it actually happens.
Well, it would be enough that you say it. You would have to believe it. There, you'd be satisfying two conditions. So if you believed it was going to rain tomorrow, you'd have the belief condition. And if it did rain tomorrow, that would be the truth condition satisfied. But if you had no reason, it wouldn't be justified. Or if you had a crappy reason, if you said, well, the reason I believe it's going to rain tomorrow is because this time last year on this date it rained. Okay, well that would be the wrong reason to think it's going to rain tomorrow.
So you have the first two of the conditions, but you would not be justified to say that was knowledge because it wasn't clearly knowledge. I had no knowledge it was going to rain tomorrow. I just thought it was for some stupid reason that it happened to come true, but there's no correlation to the actual reason that I gave.
Right. So what Plato would say there, what Socrates is said to have said according to Plato is that you had a right opinion. You happened to have a true belief, right? But the justification condition was not satisfied, and so you didn't know what you thought you knew. And so then the question is, these three ingredients in knowledge, in this particular definition of knowledge, one of many definitions on offer, what do we mean by truth? What exactly does it mean for something to be true? And, is truth different from fact? And what do we mean by a belief? Is that different from an opinion? Is that different from a deep conviction? Does belief admit of degrees, or is it all or none? And justification, that's the hairiest one. What exactly do we mean by justification? And when it comes to knowledge in general, are there different kinds of knowledge, right? Is knowledge that there's a cup in my hand right now, right? How do I know that? How do I come to know that? How do I acquire that knowledge? Well, I think, I use my senses and stuff like that, and we have intersubjective agreement, other people can see it and stuff like that. But then think about things like mathematical truths, right? 2 + 2 is 4, right? 2 + 2 = 4. The veracity of that, right? That is not a fact to be bumped into in the world. You're not going to bump into the fact that 2 + 2 is 4. Right? That is somehow a conceptual truth, right? And the way we know that 2 + 2 equals 4 is very different from the way that we know that this is a cup in my hand, right? And what about knowledge of the future? Can you really have knowledge of the future, right? When you make predictions, right? Is that genuinely knowledge? What about knowledge of things like counterfactual? Supposing I say, if I had stepped off the curb a minute ago, I would have been killed by that bus, right? Now, presumably that's true or false, right? Can one have knowledge of that? Can one have knowledge of what are called counterfactual conditionals?
As God does. That's his argument.
Yeah. So there are people, but a lot of us would think, well, yes, of course you can know that, right? I mean, we say things like that all the time. If the Allies had lost the war, Germany would have done such and such, and Japan would have done such and such. We do that all the time. If such and such had happened, then this would have been the case. But that didn't happen, right? So what makes that statement true? That state of affairs doesn't obtain. It never happened, right? So what makes a statement like that's in the subjunctive mode, a counterfactual conditional? What makes that true? We all stake our lives every day on counterfactual conditionals. There isn't a day that goes by where we don't utilize counterfactual conditional reasoning, and we assume that our counterfactual conditional assumptions are true. So, if I don't leave now, I'm going to miss the bus. Now, but if I do leave now and I get on the bus, isn't it still true that if I hadn't left then, I would have missed the bus? Surely that's true, right? But what in the world makes that true, right? I didn't miss the bus, and I didn't not leave on time. I did leave on time. So none of the relevant factors are in play there. So what makes that statement true? So that's the kinds of questions that this right?
I totally get that, but is it also kind of related to something like a fictional truth statement? Like if I say, Superman can fly, there's nothing that maps to reality on that. because there is no such thing as Superman. But that is a true. What makes it a true statement?
Well, what
I
makes? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I've done a lot of talking. Go ahead, MJ.
No, it's fine. I was just going to add on and supplement what you were saying, just because once it becomes relevant to God, I've actually done some research into this. I think you might be hinting to a view on called fictionalism, which was kind of like there's moral fictionalism, there's broadly metaphysical fictionalism and all that stuff with regard to objective truth statements, specifically propositional truth. And yeah, you could say that Superman can fly. It could be objectively true, but it's just within a fictional discourse.
And I'm okay with that. Yeah,
would deny, I guess, Ozzy could chime in on Quine's indispensability argument for abstract objects and things like that and his criterion of ontological commitment. But I guess we could deny that. The fictionalists deny that. You're necessarily committed to these objects out there that map onto reality in order to determine objective truth for propositional statements about fictional characters.
You would call them true statements. You would say that there's a reason that we can say those things are true, even though they don't map to reality.
The fictionalists can say that. I believe figuralists can say that. Neutralists say that. Pretense theory says that. There's something called semantic assent, where I think they utilize Carnap's distinction between categorical and non-categorical statements, where you have a language that's about something, then you have a language that allows you to talk about the language.
You mentioned Quine. Doesn't Quine get a lot into semantic
assent? Yeah, he does.
Yep.
So things and arguments.
And Ozzy could correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess Ozzy would say that maybe you couldn't say that because it would commit you to an object. But since there's no object there called Superman, maybe within that language you couldn't have propositional truth about it. But maybe you could talk about the language. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I'm not sort of crazy about the idea of language and meta language here. I don't know. Boy, we wanted to keep this simple, though. We're really getting into the weeds here.
I know.
Okay, well, let me just answer Steve's question. No, it's okay. So in the case of something like Superman or the Lord of the Rings, I can say, Sam Gamgee was a good friend to Frodo. That's true, right? Well, that's because we understand that the truth conditions for that are contained only in the story, right? We understand that there's nothing outside, right? In other words, we understand where the relevant truth conditions obtain. They obtain in the narrative, in the story, right? We wouldn't look in the world, right? Just like if I said, there's a car in my garage, we wouldn't look up an Archie comic to find out if there's a car in my garage. That's not going to be where you're going to find the relevant facts. So we understand that the relevant facts for something like Sam is a good friend to Frodo, is whatever facts there are, they are going to be in the story, right? But supposing I said that, Sherlock Holmes had bacon and eggs on the morning that he solved the mystery of the Hound of the Baskervilles or something like that. Okay, I don't know if that's true or not. I just made that up, but there isn't going to be a fact of the matter. That statement I submit to you is not even going to be true or false. That's a statement that can't be true or false. Why? Because presumably there isn't an account of what Sherlock Holmes had for breakfast that morning in that story. So it's not even true in that story, nor is it false. There's no fact of the matter, right, in the story. And why? Because it's an incomplete world, right? But presumably our world is complete. So for instance, we can say something like, there is a finite number of grains of sand on the Earth at any given moment. Right? It's constantly changing. New particles are being, destroyed to dust, and other grains of sand are forming through erosion of rocks and stuff like that. But at any given instant, so any frozen moment in time, there is a finite number of particles of sand, grains of sand in the world, however you might want to define a grain of sand. So there's a fact of the matter there, right? We're just never going to know. It's epistemologically inaccessible to us. We're never going to answer that question. We'll never be able to get an answer to that question. But we nevertheless believe that there is a fact of the matter about how many grains of sand there are in the world at any given moment, just as surely as there's a fact of the matter of how many hairs there are on my head. And that, I think, is a countable number. But the grains of sand, we're never going to, even if we stopped everything we were doing and all of us decided to try to solve that, answer that question, we'd never answer it, right? There's a fact of the matter, and that's because our world is complete.
So like January 1st, 1972, you either had bacon or eggs or you did not have bacon or eggs. because you existed, you exist during the time. That's something that we may never know, obviously, because we don't have a time travel machine. But there could be an accountability of that, where that actually either did happen or did not happen, rather than a story where we have no way to know because the author didn't put it in the storyline, right?
Right, and it's not that right, but you got to be careful with no way to know. In our world, whether or not I had bacon and eggs this time last year, right? A year ago today, did I have bacon and eggs? Right? There's a fact of the matter that makes that true. There is a truth maker that makes that proposition true or false. Right? But in the case of, did Sherlock Holmes have bacon on such and such a date? There is no fact of the matter. Right? So it's not that we can't know. It's that there's nothing to know. There's nothing to know.
I could say in our real world there are possible ways we could know. You could have kept a journal. There could have been evidence to support it. But either way, there's nothing in the fictional story. There's no, like you said, there's no truth maker there.
Right. And that's the difference. In one case, it's just an epistemological problem. We don't know how to find out what the facts are. But in the other, it's not that we don't know how to find out what the facts are. It's that there aren't any facts about which we can find out. In other words, I don't know what I had for breakfast last year. And I don't know what Sherlock Holmes had for breakfast on the morning that he solved a certain mystery. Okay? But the reason that I don't know in both cases is a completely different kind of reason. The reason I don't know in my case is I didn't keep a journal, right? And I can't remember. But the reason we don't know what Sherlock Holmes had for breakfast on a certain morning is because it's not written in the story. There is no fact of the matter that could make it true or false. There's nothing to know, right? So that would be another question within epistemology.
Specifically with counterfactuals too, some people at my school that adhere to open theism.
Right.
The fact of the matter with regard to the future, the people that don't believe the future actually exists, so there's no truth maker.
Now, open theism would consist of that God has the ability to know all things, but he chooses not to.
That's one version of open theism where the principle of bivalence would hold for future contingent propositions, but that God chooses actually to voluntarily limit himself in that way. Yeah. But other versions just deny the actual existence of the future. And
now, how about as far as
they would deny what's called truth maker maximalism, but.
How about as far I don't know how we got back deep stuff again, but how about when it comes to like Craig's argument for intermediate knowledge, that he's going to actually manifest some modal reality that he knows what you're going to do in that given situation, that in that situation the outcome is going to be this. He still supposedly gives you a free choice, but the free choice is not really there because he's going to put you in a situation, he's going to make a manifestation of a world where he knows already the outcome. Right, I find that to be kind of a workaround there that doesn't seem to work for me.
The reason why you're free, according to Craig, I'm actually taking a class with him tomorrow, a week-long class, but the reason why you're free in that world is that the counterfactuals that constitute God's middle knowledge are actually independent of him. That we actually
he has no control of the counterfactuals.
The truth content of them.
Truth content. All he can do is all he has the ability. By the way, you are a theist, correct?
Correct. Christian theist. Yeah.
Christian theist.
Oh, if you're talking, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. You might have broken up.
So here's the thing. So in that particular case, God has no control over the truth value of the counterfactual. He only has control over what modal possible world to put you in. What reality.
The next logical moment would be his free knowledge, where he actually instantiates or actualizes a certain subset of counterfactuals of creaturely freedom from his middle knowledge and makes them true of a world, where a world is a maximal state of affairs.
See, I still think the whole thing with the concept of free will still bothers me when it comes to philosophy. I have a hard time wrapping my head around free will. I don't think we have libertarian free will. I don't even think that compatibilism makes much sense to me in some ways.
It's a very, very difficult concept to analyze, honestly. It's still kind of mysterious to me.
But I want to formulate my opinion on it. People know I like to put myself in categories because I think it's easier to have conversations with. I don't know where I stand on that. I haven't been able to suss it out. I guess the compatibilist approach is the best I can come up with. But Harvard determinism actually seems to make a lot of sense to me as well.
Did you want to shift from epistemology to free will? I didn't want to derail it.
What's that?
Were we switching from epistemology to free will? Did you want to switch there?
Oh, I don't know. We go all over the place, so it's okay.
Well, you're free
Ozzy
to
wanted to jump in real quick. Ozzy, what?
Yeah, I have to go in a moment, but I was just going to say, Steve, you shouldn't feel this pressure, or you shouldn't put upon yourself this pressure to categorize yourself. I mean, I know it's nice to when you can. When there's a sort of landscape of different positions on a certain question, it's nice to know, where you position yourself and stuff like that, and to know the names of all these things. But don't try to shoehorn yourself into something, and don't embrace it. But I hear people say that kind of thing all the time. Like they feel that because it's an important question, they have to pick a position, and I really don't like hearing people think that way, because what ends up happening is they don't have a particularly good reason for thinking something is true, but they start to profess a position because it makes a certain amount of sense, but they don't actually think it's true, and they don't have particularly good reasons. But what ends up happening is they end up professing an allegiance to a certain idea or position because usually it's consistent with other things that they believe, right? So for instance, most people who are science boosters are fond of a physicalistic, naturalistic ontology, right, or picture of reality. And so they imagine, okay, well, therefore, everything is just, matter in motion in fields of force, right? That's it. It's just matter and energy in fields of force. That constitutes the whole of reality. So now, okay, well, they're sort of on board with something like metaphysical naturalism, and then they're asked about free will, and they have all these beliefs about free will and responsibility and agency that completely clash with that. They don't know how to square the circle, and so what they end up doing is they end up being kind of schizophrenic. And involved in all kinds of performative contradictions, because they'll say, well, my overall scientific ontology tells me that there's just matter and energy in fields of force, and that's it. And that all seems to unfold according to strict deterministic causal laws. And there's no room for free will there, as I understand it. And rather than try to get a better understanding of free will, where there could be some kind of accommodation or something like that, they'll just say, "Oh well, I'm a determinist." But then in the rest of their lives, they act like the purest libertarian free will proponents you've ever heard, right?
I totally understand what you're saying on that. I've seen the same exact thing many, many, many times, and that's why I don't want to arbitrarily just pick something, going, "Okay, this sounds good to me." That's why I haven't made certain types of statements why I believe this, or that, because I don't want to fall into that mindset, because I've seen other people do that, right? I think that a lot of atheists are they're like, oh, I subscribe to atheism, so I must be an ontological naturalist, or I must be a reductive physicalist. I don't think these things have to be the way they are. I don't think that you have, just because you are an atheist, you have to jump into the pool with everybody else and say, oh, well, yeah, I believe this because it starts with the thing that, oh, only matter and forces exist. I get that, because I've seen that happen. And what happens when they get locked into that approach, they don't know where to go in a lot of times, because hard determinism, yeah, it makes sense from a causational point of view, but since I do believe I have individual free choice on some level, right? Not completely, but I mean, I do believe that we're never without external forces that influence our decisions. So I don't believe that there could be a pure decision-making ability, but I think that my decisions do determine some things that change the outcome of the universe. And I don't think it's a systematic clockwork thing. No matter what you do, the outcome is always going to be this, some predetermined thing. I don't think that, but a Calvinist would say that, right? Or hyper Calvinist, would they not say that?
Yeah, but you see, the caution here is, I mean, you are evidently very aware of the danger here. But then this be kind of caution to anyone who's listening. A lot of people, they are committed to a certain kind of ontology, and then boom, they discover, oh, wait a minute, this creates other problems with a bunch of another set of beliefs that I have, and they don't know how to reconcile them. And so they'll say, oh well, I'm just gonna go with and try to be consistent. They'll make a god out of consistency. I'll try to be consistent with my ontology, and then they go around denying things like free will, but they don't have an account, a way of salvaging how they actually think and proceed and act in the world. And so they're involved in a performative contradiction. They live one way, but they espouse a set of beliefs that is incompatible with that. And that produces a kind of schizophrenia in your worldview. And so I always encourage people, look, just be modest here. When you haven't sorted that problem out, don't say, well, you know what? I just want a tidy worldview. So I'm going to go with, hard determinism. Why? I don't actually believe hard determinism, but it's implied by what I do believe. So instead, just live with tension, right? It's okay to have an inconsistent belief set, right? You're never going to get away from inconsistencies in your belief set.
There's no one perfect way to. There's no one that can have a completely consistent view on everything. Because obviously there's going to be some contradictions at some point, right?
Right.
There's
going to be there's going to be holes in your worldview, and there's going to be inconsistencies, and that's what you want. What you want, here's what you want in your belief set, as I see it. Consistency is great. It's an ideal. When you discover an inconsistency in your worldview, in your belief set, what it means is that something's got to give. They can't both be true. Maybe both are false. Maybe one is false. But what you don't want to do is jettison the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. Right? It's possible that your views about free will, your naive pre-theoretical intuitions about libertarian free will, maybe they're right, and maybe your commitment to metaphysical naturalism is wrong, and you're throwing out the wrong thing. You never know if you're throwing out the wrong thing when you have an inconsistency, because inconsistency by itself doesn't tell you what in your set of beliefs has to go. You just know that something's got to go, but you don't know what. So what do you do when you don't know? Well, you just say, listen, do I have reasons for believing A? Yeah. Do I have reasons for believing B? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to believe both. But I know that they don't go together. Okay. So I have another belief, C. And C is the belief that both A and B are true. So now I'm going to say this. I believe A and I believe B, but I do not believe C. And C is that both A and B are true. And you'll go, wait a minute, there's something wrong with that. Yeah, there's this inconsistency here, right? But this is the world we live in. Right? I mean, it's like this in the sciences. In the sciences, sometimes we have a theory, a model that explains these phenomena, and we have another model that explains these phenomena, and we realize there's something messed up here in these two models. They don't go together. But this model works so well in predicting and describing and explaining this, and this model over here explains these phenomena so beautifully.
Ozzy, you can explain quantum mechanics and classical physics. That's exactly what you're pointing out.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, for a time, I'm told this is no longer the case, but I'm told but well, in the case of classical physics and quantum, we can. I'm told, I'm assured by physicists that we can subsume everything within classical physics into quantum. So that's not quite the same tension. But apparently, things like relativity, for instance.
I think the analogy would have been general. Relativity with quantum, they don't play well at all.
True. Yeah. But I was actually corrected on that by a physicist who assures me that there are theories that can reconcile those. So maybe they're not reconcilable. But I don't know enough about that to weigh in on it. But the point is, there's always going to be tensions, and you just have to learn to live with those tensions. And so I would caution anyone who's interested in these philosophical questions, don't be discouraged by the fact that you can't come up with a good position and that squares with everything else that you believe, right? Just whatever you think is true, go with that, and be skeptical and try to see if it makes sense. But when you have reasons to believe A and reasons to believe B, you have reasons to believe A and you have reasons to believe B. And you can also recognize that A and B don't work, and they just have to exist in tension. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have a belief set? Oh, Kaiser, you're pausing here. I'm going to mute you. Thank you. Which would you rather have? Would you rather have a belief set that's nice and consistent and tidy, but where you don't have really good reasons to believe them? You just believed a bunch of things because you want consistency. Or would you rather have an inconsistent belief set, but where you actually have reasons to think that all those things are true? It's not like you're going to live.
The optimal would be to have a consistent belief set where everything is true, but I don't think that's even possible.
But where you have reasons for thinking, no, but that's just it. Like that's never going to happen.
It's never going to happen.
Right. So you have to choose. Which am I going to prioritize? Reasons to believe something is true or consistency? Look, consistency is a desideratum. It's what you want. You really want to have that. And reasons to believe is also a desideratum. You want both of these, right? But to make one a necessity is going to come at a cost in the other. And I would rather have a sloppy, messy, philosophical outlook that's full of inconsistencies, but where I at least have reasons for all of the things that I believe, and I will just live with the tension and try to resolve them. I mean, I don't just give up and say, oh, well, so much, right? So much for that, right? But I'm not going to jettison something that I have reasons to think is true simply for the sake of consistency. I think that is a mistake, and I think a lot of people end up with simplistic, really stupid philosophies, and start embracing things that they don't believe. They start to profess to believe things they don't actually think are true or have reasons to think are true. But then they get locked in, they get very, very wedded, they get committed. They become loyal to a certain outlook simply because they have reasons for believing something else that implies that thing, right? And that is just like signing on the dotted line. That is how you end up, that's religious thinking in a way. Sorry to disparage religion to anybody who's religious and listening, but this idea of taking on your beliefs as a package deal, right? It's like not reading the software agreement and just clicking OK, right? That's okay for that, but it's not a really great way to fill out your belief set and your worldview, right? So that's what I was cautioning against, Steve, is people prematurely want to embrace something because they feel that tension, and then they just say, oh, well, so what? I'll jettison what I think is true because this particular philosophy over here, this position over here is tidy, and it sorts well with something else I do believe and have reason to believe is true, like my scientific ontology, for instance.
Yeah, I'm on board with that 1,000%. As a matter of fact, some of the things we've seen people do is they take on board the most untenable positions, such as people saying, "I don't have any beliefs. They're just beliefs don't exist in my worldview," and I'm like, "What? That makes no sense to me, right? I mean, obviously people have beliefs."
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Activist approach that they're willing to jettison the foundation of epistemology, which is knowledge and beliefs, right? Because knowledge being a subset of belief, epistemology does include obviously beliefs. And to say I don't have beliefs, and I'm like, well, then how can you have knowledge? How can you do anything else? And I think that what they're doing is they're cutting themselves off the kneecaps by doing that.
Well, can I one thing I want to I agree with everything you guys are saying 100%, but my confusion is that it seems like I like to try to dumb things down, and in dumbing this down, it seems like Ozzy is really advocating for a bottom-up approach than a top-down approach, because it seems like in the approach that he was saying before, in which you have consistency, that's at the macro level. That's things are consistent, but at the baseline level, you really don't understand why things are consistent, versus the other way where you do understand at the micro level that why things are consistent, but don't understand. But there is no consistent, while you understand at the micro level why things work, but there is no consistency at the macro level. So that bottom-up approach is kind of what science does versus the religious approach, where you're talking about looking things at the macro level, saying they are consistent, and just placing something there as a placeholder to have some type of superficial understanding of why they may be good, but don't really understand why it actually works. Just because it works, that's why you hold
right.
to
And in fact, it's funny you say that before Ozzy has to go, but he has a question on the table. But it's funny you mentioned that, because I said the exact same thing you did, the MP, the other day, almost verbatim. Maybe you were listening, but yeah, that some people use a placeholder to as a reason for something, as an explanation, even though they have no justification for it, and that necessarily doesn't really work for me. I don't want to have a placeholder that I say this is the explanation, even though the explanation has no mechanistic cause for anything to make anything happen. So, but anyways, real quick. So yeah, Ozzy, I wanted to ask you that question by Darwin's Greatest Hits, because he had asked it, and I thought it was a good question. If you want to answer it, want me to read it off, or you want to read it?
I can read it. I see it here now. Thanks for posting it here. I hadn't seen it. Yeah, can you ask Ozzy if he thinks internalism and externalism are competitors rather than different types of justification? Actually, MJ just posted in the chat that external internalism can be applied to knowledge or justification. So you can be an internalist with one and an externalist with respect to the other. But let's just, he's asking about justification here. So with respect to theories of justification, they're broadly speaking two types, internalism and externalism, or these theories can all be subsumed under one or the other of those. But do you have to be a strict internalist or a strict externalist? Well, no, I don't think you do. I think you can be internalist with respect to some questions, and externalist with respect to certain other kinds of questions, because there are different kinds of knowledge, and the justification, the types of justification that obtain is relative to the type of knowledge. So for instance, for empirical beliefs, right, like ordinary things about the sensory world around me, I think you need to be an externalist. Internalism doesn't make any sense. Okay? But for things like apodictic knowledge, right, or sometimes called a priori knowledge, right, knowledge of logic, knowledge of mathematical truths and things like that, analytic truths and stuff like that, I think there we actually predominantly rely on internalist conceptions of justification. So it's not that I think internalism is just a useless concept. When we were talking, about the how do you know that, I had in mind the kind of thing that a cyclone presupposition was going to be talking about, which is going to be questions about the reliability of your senses, how do you know you're not dreaming, questions about the empirical world around you. And there, I think externalism is the way to go. So I guess I'd be a pretty strict externalism with respect to empirical knowledge. But there's other kinds of knowledge. There's knowledge of different kinds of facts. There are empirical facts, and then there are things like the facts of logic, right? Or the facts of mathematics or set theory or geometry or analytical truths like all bachelors are unmarried men and stuff like that. The way we know those facts is not because of some externalism necessarily. Although I think, because I'm a reliabilist, externalism has to be at the root even of internalism, which is sort of a whole other conversation. So anyway, with that, I gotta get going.
Externalism has to be at the root of internalism. I'm going to wrap my head around that one here.
Yeah, well, that's a view that has gotten me into a bit of trouble when I was.
I'm trying to work on that. I'm not like dissing you. I'm just going, what?
Well, that's because the reason I say that is it's a view that was tough for me to defend in grad school, actually. But
Ozzy, before you go, I wanted to ask you something real quick before you go. I just I have a hard time wrapping my head around when you talk about things like empirical beliefs. That really just sounds like an oxymoron to me. I can't. The way I've always thought of a belief is, if you believe in something, you have to have some kind of faith where you can't repeat it, you can't measure it, you can't test it. I can't wrap my head around believing something in which you can basically use a scientific method on to either prove or disprove it.
This is a view that I've heard expressed by some people, and I think almost certainly you're an atheist, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. I would have bet anything.
This is what I mentioned earlier.
Okay. Here's why I sometimes hear a lot of atheists say this, and I think it's because you're allergic to the word belief, and that's because the word belief
exactly
is used in two senses. Okay. The sense in which we've been talking about belief here, in the ordinary epistemological sense, is merely thinking that something is true. If you think something is true, that's what a belief is, right? That's all it is to believe something, is to think that something is the case, right? If I think that this is a cup in my hand, if I think it's the case that there's a cup in my hand, that's what it is to have a belief, right? For me to say this is a cup in my hand, and for me to say I believe that this is a cup in my hand, right, is not saying much difference, right? Because a belief is just an attitude towards a proposition. There is a proposition that I take to be true, that there's a cup here in my hand. And so when I say I believe that there is a cup in my hand, all I'm doing is stating that I think the proposition, there is a cup in my hand, is true. Right? So if you think that something is true, if you think something is the case, you have a belief. Now, a belief can be true or it can be false. A belief can be justified or unjustified, be well-warranted or poorly warranted. It can be completely irrational or exquisitely rationally supported by the best conciliant science we can muster. Okay, so I don't think that we should ever go around saying things like, I don't believe in evolution, I know evolution to be true. Look, if you take evolution to be true, then you believe it to be true. But don't confuse the word belief with mere blind faith, right? And people who have blind faith also have beliefs. They believe something, but it's an unwarranted belief. It's an unjustified belief. It may be true or false, right? But don't think that the word belief means mere belief, not justified belief. Right?
Well, I have to say that you are a lot more practical than the apologists that throw that word around pretty just almost fallaciously.
Yeah, but they use different contexts, Kaiser, right? And
Yeah.
here's the thing. The like you were saying, if there's a proposition P equals something, and you evaluate that, you say it's true or false. That is your belief. That's what the word means in philosophy. You're taking a position. Usually,
It's not just, Steve. It's not just. That's not just the position in philosophy. That's how we talk every day.
Yeah,
right?
sure. I mean, colloquially, I think too as well. I agree.
Yeah.
But I'm just using an example that but people say that they don't have beliefs. They're not understanding what that word means day to day. I mean, even in general speech, I say, I believe that tomorrow, I believe that my daughter is going to get good grades. I have that belief because I think she's smart, right?
That's a good belief.
And I have warrant for that because I've seen her work. But I think what happens is a lot of these theologians take these words and they use them differently, which is fine. They're allowed to, but that doesn't mean other people can't use them in more ways that we are understanding them to be. Like the word faith. You have faith that your wife's not going to cheat on you. There's nothing wrong with using that word.
Yeah. How would this?
Oh wait, I lost Steve for a second there. I lost Steve.
If you cut out for a second, but would it be like we could put this in a Venn diagram? All faith-based claims are belief claims, but not all belief claims are faith-based. Would that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So what happens, though, I think, is that within the Great Debate, the word belief gets used to mean religious belief. Right. We'll say, well, you mustn't challenge people's religious beliefs, or people will say things like that, right? We'll sometimes talk about people's faith, and by faith we don't mean that they have faith. We sometimes mean just their religion, like the Islamic faith, the Christian faith, the Jewish faith, the Baha'i faith, right? So sometimes the word faith means a faith commitment, but sometimes it's just a way of referring to an entire religion, which may or may not be faith-based. Okay. I think there are some versions of Buddhism, for instance, that are really fairly well empirically grounded and are not full of extravagant metaphysical faith claims, right? But we could still talk about that particular kind of Buddhism as a faith, right? And I think it makes sense to say I have faith in science, but I don't have blind faith in science, right? So faith is another word like
a confidence. Like a confidence?
Yeah, you have a confidence in it, sure.
Yeah, I have a faith in science, right? I have faith in science, right? Well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is I trust science and I feel a certain loyalty to it. Okay, now why? Well, I think there are excellent reasons why one should feel a certain loyalty and trust in science. Okay, so faith doesn't have to is another word like belief. You don't have to evacuate it from your vocabulary and treat it like a pariah because it's associated with religions, right? Religions don't own these words, and I think what happens in the Great Debate is people talk about the word belief and they assume that belief means blind belief, unwarranted, unjustified belief. Right, and people will refer to their religion as their belief, right? Well, hey, you're challenging my belief, like they mean my whole belief set, my whole religious outlook, for instance, right? And then people, atheists especially, critics of religion, then take the word belief and it becomes so laden in their own minds because of the discourse that they participate in, becomes so laden with connotations of religiosity that they become allergic to the word, and they don't want to ever be told that they have a belief. But then they say ridiculous. They go around saying, I don't have any beliefs. Really? You don't believe this is a cup? No, I accept that it's a cup. That's what it means to have a belief, is to accept that it's true that this is a cup. And so I think a lot of us in the online atheist movement, we sometimes make ourselves sound a little bit ridiculous. Because we look like we're sort of walking on eggshells and tiptoeing around certain words that we treat like landmines. These are perfectly ordinary words. Everyone knows what they mean. But here's the defensive move that happens. You'll sometimes hear religious people say, "You have beliefs too," and what they're trying to suggest there is that your beliefs are just unwarranted beliefs. They're blind beliefs. Hey, you have beliefs. I have beliefs. If I can believe in God, then your belief in relativity or an old earth, or that's just a belief. Well, you don't have to look, there aren't just beliefs. There's all kinds of beliefs, well-warranted ones and poorly warranted ones, irrational ones, rational ones, true beliefs and false beliefs. And so when someone accuses you of having beliefs, you just say, yeah, I have beliefs. I think mine are well-warranted, right? Let's hear the warrant for yours, right? And I'll give you the warrant for mine if you ask, right? So I think that's the way to approach it, is not to be allergic to words like belief and faith. Just take them on and say, yeah, of course, I have faith in things. I think there's a different sense of the word faith here. You're playing a shell game. And I would go so far as to say that I have at the very, very bottom of my belief set, in fact, I would submit at the bottom of everyone's belief set, that there are faith claims that undergird everything, and I think that they are blind faith claims. I think that at the core of rationality itself are beliefs that we hold with the deepest possible commitment, which we cannot defend, except on pain of circularity. We end up violating some epistemic norm, like arguing in a circle or something like that. So I'm not even worried about allegations that I have blind faith commitments, because I think at the core of rationality itself are faith commitments that are not even rational, that are not warrantable. It's not that they're not warranted; they're unwarrantable, except on pain of circularity. So, but we all have those, and they're universal. So the faith claims that I worry about are not the faith claims that we cannot avoid, that we all have, that are at the core of rationality. The faith claims I think that we need to worry about are the ones that aren't universal, that are not properly basic, that are, in my view, gratuitous and can be dispensed with. Right? Those are the blind faith ones. Right? Those are the ones that I worry about.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier, though. I mean, what we're talking about, but people get so entrenched in this belief system, or like, for example, atheism, that they want to take on a bunch of other things that make them sound really strange to me. Like, it's like saying that they don't have beliefs, right? And I think theists latch onto that. I think it makes them look silly, and that to me does not promote good philosophy, good science, or whatever. It just makes that person look silly. And there's a lot of people in our community that are very intelligent, very scientific, but when they start saying things to me that just makes me cringe, I know to a well-educated theist, they're going to look pretty silly as well. And
not just to a well-educated theist. I think to an ordinary person on the street, if you go around saying, "I'm a skeptic, I have no beliefs," they're going to look at you. I mean, with incredulity. They're just going to think, "What the heck are you talking about?"
Yeah, because I think, I don't know. Some people, I don't think they even know there's different types of skepticism, right? I mean, they don't even know what person means when they say they're a skeptic. I mean, they just kind of like.
I mean, someone like who's sort of interested in not philosophical skepticism, but skepticism as a movement, as a kind of critical thinking. Okay, so if you want to go around positioning yourself and declaring yourself to be a rationalist and a critical thinker and a skeptic in that sense, then that's great. But I mean, don't let your choice of words and your view of epistemology be dictated by connotations that certain words have, right? Because you're going to end up painting yourself into a corner and looking and sounding ridiculous, and then you discredit yourself as a reliable source of critical thinking, right? I mean, it kills me when I hear people espousing something like epistemism, and they go around saying, I don't take anything on faith, and all of my beliefs are justified and justifiable and actually justified. I mean, good grief, if you think all of your beliefs are consistent with one another and that they're all not only justifiable but justified, right? I think you haven't examined your belief set very deeply.
Lost it.
Right?
Yeah, I think that's untenable. I think that's untenable too. But I think one of the reasons they say is, oh well, we don't want, and I hate this, but this is what they say. We don't want to play into the hands of the theist. No offense to the theists in the room, but that's what they say. They think by using words like belief or faith or whatever, they're somehow playing into the hands of the theist. I think that's absolutely the wrong approach. I think it does the opposite. I think by saying that you don't have belief, or understanding that belief is how you evaluate a proposition. You take something on a proposition as true or false. You have a belief in that. That's what it is. But to say that you don't have that, I think that makes it even worse, and you are typically playing to the hands of a theist. They go look at you, go like, yeah, you're just not even worth talking to at this point, kind of thing.
Yeah, and even when we're don't go ahead, MJ. Sorry, I need to go anyway. So.
Oh, if you got to go ahead. I don't want to cut you off if you don't have time.
No, that's okay. I don't have anything.
Well, are you taking off, Oz?
Yeah, I got to go, but I'll be listening. I'll be making dinner, so.
I was just going to speak from a Christian perspective. I'm a Christian theist. And I just think from my point of view, from the standpoint of the Christian Academy and all that stuff, I just think it's a breath of fresh air to not interpret these kinds of conversations in terms of like some kind of a fight or a debate, and that we're just fellow travelers trying to map logical space with each other's help, since we all come from unique perspectives and things like that. But as far as like playing it in the hands of theists and all that stuff, I just wish that those kind of tactics and strategies and even that vocabulary itself would just kind of fizzle away, and we could all just help each other. That's all I was going to say. That's pretty much the perspective of the Christian academics that I've been around.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we have a mindset in the great debate community that, look, I'm going to speak for me at least, and if other people agree, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine as well. But to me, I personally don't give a shit between the difference between the atheist and theist battle. That's not my concern. Right. I think it's irrationality versus rationality. And I've seen very rational theists. Many of them. I mean, General Han Solo, very rational theist. I have the utmost respect for, and there's very rational atheists like Ozzy, right? But I see when people try to adopt this position. I'm going to be a theist, therefore I have to espouse this and this, or I'm an atheist, I have to espouse this and this. That's where I see the irrationality start coming to play. Like people saying they don't have beliefs. That to me is irrational. That makes sense.
And even. Yeah, it totally makes sense to me. And even if I were to hear an outlandish position like that, like I think it's called eliminativism with regard to certain phenomena. Like I think Daniel Dennett would be an eliminativist with regard to consciousness. Exists really. Even if they denied it, I think it's just my particular psychology would still. I wouldn't find it immediately absurd. I would want to map that logical space with that person before I pronounced upon it.
Yeah, no, you do. Of course, you want to suss it out, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk about that and say, okay, well, why do you think this way? And hopefully make them realize that they're not having a very sturdy position. But like, for example, I'll give you a recent thing. It happened yesterday and carried over to today, MJ, because I think people, they love science, right? I think most people in the GDC love science. And there are people that have a very, not a strong understanding of it, or especially philosophy of science. So let's say, and I say, hey, listen, the theory of evolution is not proven. And they'll be like, oh, that's creationist speak. That's what a creationist would say. Well, well, hang on. The reason that anybody would say that knows science, whether they're creationists or not, understands that a scientific theory can never be proven by definition, because there's always things that change, and also there's a falsification criteria that needs to be existing for a theory to really be a scientific theory. And when you say something is proven, you've now eliminated the falsification, falsification criteria. So no educational facility teaches that the theory of evolution is proven. You have math and logic; those prove things, but you don't prove a scientific theory. Now, most of us who've had science understand that. But somebody else would be like, Steve, that doesn't make any sense. You're speaking like a creationist now. You're not being rational. Well, no, it's that they don't understand what a scientific theory is, but they're so adoptive to this. Oh, creationists are always out there saying evolution isn't true. If theory of evolution isn't true. Well, that's a different claim, though. Of course, evolutionary theory is true. It is a valid scientific theory that explains phenomenon. Evolution itself as a biological thing where you have a change of allelic frequency in a population that actually happens. Common descent goes back 4 billion years. All that stuff is true. But you'd never want to say in science that a scientific theory is proven. And they get on that, though, because they're so locked in this. They're so grained in it that that's what a creationist would say. But a creationist would be right on that.
But Steve, wouldn't the argument, because it seems like the argument would be more of or less versus truth versus provisional truth, because I think science proclaims provisional truth. This is true based on the best evidence we have now, but this may not be true in the future. So
So how can it be proven then? How can anything in science be proven? Science is not in the business to prove anything. That's not what
it's the opposite, actually. It's to science is in the business of disproving, really.
Yeah, actually, that's true. I mean, think about it. As Feynman said, a theory is just a theory until it's been disproven. It can never be proven.
I'm agreeing with you, Steve, but I'm just thinking the nuance of the argument would be truth versus provisional truth, because it seems like people are proclaiming science to be actual truth, and that's just it's
but a truth. But when you talk about truth, is like, for example, somebody had asked, "What is proof beyond a reasonable doubt?" I can give you a mathematical proof of something. I can show you that the square root of -2 is irrational. That is a proof beyond any doubt, not just reasonable. That is a proof. That is a fact. That cannot be any other way. Okay. There's no provisionalism in that. Those are proofs. That's why proofs only exist in mathematics and logic. But do you see the mindset people get into? You tell them, stop telling people that theory of evolution is proven. Because when you go into an argument, you tell a creationist that actually knows science, they're going to say, well, if there's such a thing, they're going to say you're wrong. You don't understand the philosophy of science, right?
I think a better way to really kind of put it into a picture of what the term theory is in science would be that a theory is if you push it beyond its limits of prediction, it'll break down. There's no scientific theory in which pervades absolutely everything. Eventually, when you push any scientific theory to its limit, it's going to break down. And that's the whole.
You have to use it what it's actually purporting to explain, right?
Right, exactly. So, let's say, for example, the equation for getting the ambient temperature outside by counting how many chirps a cricket will make every 15 seconds. There's actually an equation for that, but if you use it for something outside of that parameters, it's not going to work for anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very narrow window of temperatures, and it just happens to be a correlating thing. That is true. That is a fact. But again, anytime a theory does, it explains phenomenon, right? And it makes predictions based upon that. We're constantly testing theories. I mean, it's even Einstein's theory of relativity. We're testing it. General relativity, the theory of gravity. That may not be the same theory we have 1,000 years from now. Now, does that mean that the theory of relativity is wrong? No. It just probably means that it did not incorporate things that we did not know at this time, just like Newtonian physics didn't incorporate relativistic concepts. That just because we have the theory of relativity, it does not mean Newtonian physics is wrong. I've had somebody argue with me the other day that Newton was wrong. No.
It's simply a stacking. It's simply Newtonian gravity is simply expression in reverse. Relativity, the field equation, is basically an addition to Newtonian gravity. Basically, Newtonian gravity works until you get into either a situation where the gravitational fields are too high, or the space-time warpage is too high, or the sensitivity that you're looking for in your instruments are too great for the environment that you're going to be using.
Well, you're going very fast, right? You're going a certain part of the speed of light, then it breaks down too. But yeah,
right.
They assume the Newtonian kinematics. You can actually use relativity just as easy as you could. Well, not easy. It's not that easy, but you could also use relativity to model what we could use Newtonian physics for. But since Newtonian physics is so much simpler, and it's a pretty damn good approximation. The vast majority
unnecessary.
Yeah, it's a little unnecessary unless you're doing orbital mechanics where you're dealing with things where you're driving very fast or you're dealing with a gradient of gravity. You don't need to, but it's the same thing. Like I've said, we've all taken parametric equations. We've all taken kinematics where you say, okay, I shoot a gun, the bullet goes in this trajectory and it comes back down, or a cannonball. That is a parabolic path. But in reality, it's really not. It's actually elliptical. But the equations for elliptical mathematics is a lot more complicated for that than that of dealing with parabolas. A lot more complicated. So if it gives you the exact same answer for the most part, up to a certain amount of digits, why bother using the more complicated maths?
That's when I went to when College Math 1. that was one of the first things that they had to do was they had us plotting canyon trajectories, basically the whole thing about having it going over or into a canyon where the drop was, when raised the wind. I'm stuttering like mad. Anyway, the point is, there were a lot of parts of the equation where I was like, they were unnecessary, and I think they gave those extra parts where I just didn't need them. I remember throwing a lot of it out. I just didn't even need it.
Well, yeah, I mean, dude, think about the equation E equals MC squared, right? We all know that's not the whole equation. But the other part of the equation dealing with momentum and
right, where you have something's motion, that only applies.
Yeah, well, you don't need it. It factors out anyways when you're dealing with something just to figure out the energy mass relationship. You're not worried about the particles.
Right, no kinetic energy. That's if the equals MC squared is like no kinetic energy at all. No.
Right, that part of the equation that's factored out is part of the KE. Well, if I'm not worried about kinetic energy, then why bother using that equation? You could just use E equals MC squared. Same principle, but most of us understand that E equals MC squared is actually a distilled version of the longer formula. Right?
Oh, sorry, I had to get a little distracted. Sorry. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's a simplified form because the real form of it isn't it E squared equals M squared C to the fourth plus H bar C to the eighth or something like that?
Off the top of my head. I would have to actually look it up, and I'm not going to. But yeah, it's a much longer. I don't use it. It doesn't. Yeah, it uses. I think it has two more terms to it, doesn't it?
I don't have it memorized, and I'm on my cell. I can't go to another window to go to look at the equations, so don't ask me. But yeah.
It has multiple terms, but those terms, like I said, if I just want to know the mass energy equivalence of something without factoring in those other things, then I don't need to worry about it. I don't use the longer equation. It goes to zero anyways. But anyway, that's the
no, sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it wasn't anything important.
So does everybody kind of get that? But anyways, let's drop back into the epistemology here, because I mean we got MJ here who obviously is very much into philosophy. I'm diving very heavily into philosophy as of lately. I've actually written a few things on the Great Debate Community G+. These are just things that come to me, and I take a very noetic approach to this. I basically, as I'm thinking of something, I want to write it down, and then I just kind of proofread it, see if it makes sense, and I go over and I fix it, and I just get a more working thing that I'm thinking of. And so far, they've generated dialogue. That's the whole point. I could be right, I could be wrong. Somebody could say, Steve, that's just completely fucked up. You're an idiot. I'll be like, yeah, you know what? That was kind of stupid. Move on. I'll, not make that argument anymore. But I'm trying to come up with arguments and at least conversations that people might have want to talk about. But the problem I'm finding, and this was pointed out to me, that because not a lot of people know these topics, it's catering to a niche, and more people may want to involve themselves in the conversation, but they may feel that they're not able to do so because of the wording or the context, and I don't want that to be the case. So I'm trying to put like for example, the one I did relating propositional calculus, I related it in common language too, or natural language. That way people can join in. But the problem I found out that when people respond, they're not going to use natural language. They're just going to assume that that they're going to work from the predicate calculus kind of thing. Do you kind of see where I'm going with this? So I'm trying to figure out a way where we can have conversations that include everybody, where people are not listening and going, yeah, that I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I don't want that to happen. I want everybody to be engaged in the topic, because I don't think these topics are so advanced that nobody can understand them. Certain people can.
Well, I'm hoping this is relative. I'm not sure if it is or not. I'm just gonna throw it out there. If it's not, then just shut me the hell up. And I have noticed a lot of people especially last week. I don't know how this conversation started coming about. With the people were talking about Sam Harris and he was. I don't know where I was hearing this from. I wish I could remember. They were saying that I think it was Jordan Peterson was talking about it. I think that's where I started hearing it from. It was some kind of interview with Jordan Peterson. He was talking about how people like Sam Harris he couldn't accept him saying that he has no oh god, now I've got total brain lock. I can't remember how he worded it, where he had basically what Ozzy was saying, had no beliefs, absolutely zero beliefs whatsoever, and that's what really got me caught on to this hangout, was where he was talking about Sam Harris saying he has absolutely no beliefs whatsoever, and where he was thinking that everything that like human beings can like basically evolve into these moral creatures with no kind of internal meditation. I don't know.
They call philosophical zombies. I think of the term.
Yeah. That sounds about right. I wish I could.
I've ever seen.
I wish I could I don't know exactly how he said it, and he said it so perfectly too. But that sounds about what he was talking about.
What do you think about philosophical zombies? I mean, I can see their use for. I mean, there is a reason to actually bring up philosophical zombies, but for the people to actually believe, well, they don't even believe it because they don't have no beliefs. People that purport themselves to be these philosophical zombies, where they have no beliefs or anything. I mean, what do you think of that, MJ?
Well, as it's typically put forward by, I think David Chalmers brought it up first, and I forget exactly when. I think it might have been the early 90s for the hard problem of consciousness, but basically it was an attack on a strict functionalist account of consciousness, where functionalism basically says that mental states can be understood exhaustively in terms of inputs and outputs. And zombies are functionally identical to us, where you just assume functionalism is true, and these zombies are functionally identical to us.
Right.
Inputs and outputs aren't sufficient for consciousness. The zombies would be identical to us and yet not have consciousness. So therefore, consciousness is an add-on to whatever functionalists are trying to say about mental states.
So and I'm trying to relate it to the whole belief thing. So you have a P zombie, philosophical zombie, and that zombie does, from my perspective, I see a philosophical zombie and I see you. And I know, let's say, just to argue window, that I know that you exist. I know you're a real person, MJ. This philosophical zombie has all the same experiences you have, literally the same experiences. They're sentient, even, right? Oh, excuse me, no, wait. I'm sorry. They're identical to you in action. I'm sorry, they're identical to you in action, but they lack the sentience you have. They have no quality experience whatsoever, right? How do I, as an external person, determine whether you're the philosophical zombie or they're the philosophical zombie?
Correct. Yeah, that's the question. Because from the outside, they look and act just like you do. And if you are a functionalist, you would have to even say that you don't have consciousness, which is absurd. Yeah. It's a reductio ad absurdum.
And that's why when I brought up philosophical zombies for the beliefs, to me, when somebody says they have no beliefs, they're putting themselves as an actual philosophical zombie. They have. To me, I at that point, I'm like, are they don't exist? I mean, they're not a real person, right? Because I think that a philosophical zombie would have no beliefs because they have no sentience. So that's how I'm relating it to a philosophical zombie. But they don't mean to do that. But that seems to be the consequences of them saying that they have no beliefs.
Right, and beliefs are a subset of mental states. So that's where that argument from Chalmers comes in. So beliefs themselves are constituted by inputs, outputs.
Did you read anything that I wrote on the GDC lately, MJ? Have you checked any of that stuff out? I wrote like 4 things in the last couple of weeks. My mind was kind of racing, so I just kind of spewed it out there.
I've been on this stuff in about a year, and I think you're like the only one who I respect, so I come on here.
Oh, thank you. I didn't recognize your name. Obviously, you were under / before.
Exactly. I just changed it to my actual name.
So I do know you. I did, and I recognize the picture, but of course anybody can have the photo of Rembrandt. But I do know who you are.
Ruthlessly attacked one time, and I'm like, the heck with this. And I took like a 1.5-year break.
Didn't I intervene on your behalf on something like that?
You stood up for me, and I appreciated it.
Yeah, I stood up for Thea. See?
There you go.
No, but I mean, I don't remember the exact situation, but I do remember you were being dogpiled pretty hard. Yeah, I mean, but since then, I mean, I've really been in learning about philosophy. I've been reading on my own time a lot about these things for a very long time, for the last couple of years, actually. Now, I will never be on the level of Ozzy or anybody like that by any stretch of the imagination. I won't even bother to try. I don't want to, but I wanted to have a conceptualization of these things. I wanted to understand the topic, because I really can't stand when Darn's Greatest Hits makes a video and I just go, well, I don't get it, which I don't do anymore. I actually understand what the hell he's saying most of the time now.
I can do my best with clarifying issues. I don't have the same kind of expertise that he has or the teaching experience that he has, but we both have the same degree. I'm not sure exactly where he got it, though, but he's definitely a lot more articulate than me. I can say that.
He has a very good way to teach these things. He has a very good way, a pedagogical approach to say, I understand this, but you know what? That doesn't matter. I want you to understand it. Let me explain it to you in a way that I think you can understand it. I think Ozzy has a very good way of doing that.
It's a gift. It's awesome.
Drink the Kool-Aid, man. Drink the Ozzy Kool-Aid. It's funny. Theist or atheist, it doesn't matter. They still drink the Ozzy Kool-Aid. It's true, though, because Ozzy, you know, when he wants to promote his atheism, that's fine. He could do that, and he does in some hangouts. But when he's just talking about philosophy, you know, he just presents it, and he just wants people to understand.
I can vouch it's good Kool-Aid.
It is good Kool-Aid.
And it's correct. I can vouch for it. Everything he was saying, I've actually read in essays and books and stuff. So it is correct.
Well, but see, okay. Here's the thing. When I go on to these videos, or I go into their hangouts or whatever, and I'm constantly challenged on my epistemology or my theology or whatever, a lot of the people that challenge me are not up to a level to even explain to me why I'm right or wrong. And this is not some kind of aloof thing. This is not something that I'm saying, look, I'm smart, you're not. That's nothing like that at all. It is, look, if you're going to tell me that as an agnostic, I'm an agnostic, that I must be an atheist because I'm an agnostic, I need you to tell me using actual valid reasons, right? Mm-hmm. Something that is concrete, something that is ingratiated in philosophy or in logic. Don't just say because you've heard some video, you've heard some atheist, you know, representative of the atheist community say, "Oh, atheist, the only thing to be an atheist is you lack a belief." That to me does nothing for me. That's just parroting. It's not, they're not understanding. But I get that a lot. I really do.
Well, it'd be a lot more charitable if they presented it as a taxonomy. Like if they said, okay, well, you have this one subset of atheists over here that I've read from this source, which says that it's a lack of belief. Do you fall into that bucket? And if not, then seek conceptual clarification from the person actually espousing it. A lot of philosophical discussion that I've found in my experience, I think it's like 90% knowing how to have a civil dialogue. It's conversational skills, and almost like the knowledge comes second. Because like if you don't have dialogue skills, I mean, you're not going to actually talk to anybody. You got to.
Well, I agree with that. But a dialogue seems to stop when you're telling somebody that they're wrong solely because you've watched some YouTube video.
Correct. Yeah, they got to confess that. Like if that was me, then I would be like, well, my only kind of concern about that was something I saw in a YouTube video, so it probably has no weight whatsoever. But can I just put it on the table for you to consider?
That's so different. That's a different approach, though.
Way to go about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But for example, like I mean, a lot of us have stood up back in the day where people would use the argument, "Oh, well, if you're a theist, you're mentally delusional. You have a mental disorder." And even the atheist community said, "Oh, no. That's not the type of argumentation we want to have." Mm-hmm. Right? And that got shut down pretty quick, although there was a lot of people back years ago, not a lot, but there's a few that really wanted to run with that. Well, they're no longer around because they just would not realize why that was just a piss poor way to have a fucking dialogue, right?
Yeah, it may or may not be true, but as far as the pejorative nature of the actual accusation, it's just really hard to find a charitable conversation partner to interact with that objectively.
Yeah, I mean, anybody could put that argument. I can say, oh, well, atheists are just mentally delusional. They have no basis to be an atheist. Or I can say, oh, theists are mentally delusional. It doesn't do anything to further the conversation because from an externalist point of view, we don't know which one is delusional. And plus, if you still want to get in the medical thing, there's nothing in the DMC that even puts that as a medical condition. So you're already wrong on that account fundamentally, right?
That's interesting. I hadn't known that. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Did Dawkins have precedent for choosing that title, or was he just trying to be pejorative? Or
Wait, Dawkins, what title?
What title?
The Christian delusion or the God delusion?
Oh, the God delusion? No.
Look,
I didn't read that book, but I know of it. I think he's arguing the God delusion is more based because there is a part of the brain called the God, what is it called? The God part of the brain. But he's arguing that religion is something that man tends to want to do, but it's actually a part of a physical part of the brain. But that's not a delusional state. He's more arguing that it is because of a physical part of the brain.
Can I say something about Dawkins real quick? Because this guy, I mean, Dawkins, look, he's a fantastic biologist, right? Look, no doubt. But the thing is, like, did you guys see the YouTube video of Neil deGrasse Tyson pretty much scolding Dawkins for his lack of humaneness when he was basically giving a lecture? It was one of the most viral YouTube videos. It's like it's in the top 5 of all time. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, where Neil deGrasse Tyson was basically scolding Dawkins for being extremely snippy and very, very teethy in his the way he was delivering a lecture. And I never actually saw.
Well, Dawkins is an activist, right? I think
that was a part 1 of what I was getting that, and I was actually saying that to get to the second part of what I wanted to say. He made probably one of those nastiest tweets I think I've ever seen from someone about the Vegas shooting. I don't know if you ever saw the tweet that he made, but I think really.
So he had Sarah said Dawkins says a lot of weird shit, and I agree with Sarah. I think Dawkins does say a lot of weird shit.
Dude, that was like something like the tweet he made was beyond fucked up. I mean, it was bad.
But I love Neil deGrasse Tyson, but I think even Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think he has a problem. He labels himself as agnostic, but I think he does so for political reasons. Because he's a science communicator. That he doesn't want to take on that label, and I get the reasons for that. I really do, but at the same time, I fully believe he's actually an atheist.
Well, long story short, I just think Dawkins needs to stick with what he's good at, and because he just sucks at social.
I've said the same thing. I'm like, well, and a lot of people even said that he's not even relevant in biology anymore. But these activists, the 4 horsemen, all this stuff, they're putting out this narrative that I think makes people feel good. It's I'm telling you what you want to hear in order to bring me to agree with me. I don't really hear any of them really say things that are controversial to the point to an atheist would go, oh yeah, I don't agree with that. Like Ozzy and I say controversial stuff because we disagree with a lot of things the atheist activists are saying. It's not that I'm not saying that atheism is false, and certainly that's not what Ozzy is saying. He's an atheist. What we're saying is that the things that they say are not sound. And then we try to explain it. And Ozzy has a much more effective way of doing it. But I have been back channeling some of this stuff, like the whole atheism, the agnostic atheism thing. That is nonsensical. And we've had conversations off air and stuff like that. And even Dillahunty put out where he was talking to Anthony I can never get his name right. Anthony, whatever his name is.
Too many Anthonys, a lot of Anthonys.
I know, forgive me, Anthony. Matta. I'm going to get it right one of these days. I'm going to say it 5,000 times.
Hold on. So we're defining atheism as the belief that God doesn't exist, right?
No, we're not defining it anyway. We're not talking about definitions. It has nothing to do with definitions. But he has actually come around and said, "Look at So
hold on. So how are you defining the word then?
I'm not defining it at all. I'm not getting into definitions. All I'm saying is that Dillahunty has said, if you're an atheist and you label yourself an agnostic atheist, it is nonsensical. And I agree with them. I agree with them before he even said that. That's one. I think a lot of the things we were talking about had actually led into that. Yeah, Magna Bosco. Magna Bosco. Thank you. I will get that right eventually. Magna
Why
Bosco.
when did he said that?
What he said it to Dan Dillahunty said it to Anthony Magna Bosco when Magna Bosco said he had agnostic atheist on his profile, and he said we kind of agree that that's kind of most atheists, and actually Dillahunty said actually no. More recently, I have kind of thought it over, kind of thing, and I found that if you claim to be a lack of belief atheist, a soft atheist, it is nonsensical to then call yourself an agnostic atheist, and he's absolutely right.
All right,
Because the problem is that you're not have it. What?
No, I'm trying to understand the logic. Can
because if you're a soft atheist, you don't have a doxastic position. How therefore can you put an epistemic modifier on it?
Steve, I believe you have your bag of shushes right behind you, right there. You might need to use those.
They're not talking to me. Can you hear my roommates? They're not talking to me.
The mistake that I found that Matt Dillahunty made in his taxonomy was, I think I heard him say a couple times that knowledge was a subset of belief, which I didn't follow that part at all, because belief is a constituent of knowledge. So I didn't see how it could be.
No. That's
the reason. The reason for that is if you look on a Venn diagram, right? Knowledge is a subset of belief, because in order to have knowledge, you first must have to have belief. Therefore, it is a subset.
All knowledge claims beliefs.
That's the reason. That's where they get the knowledge of the subset of belief, and it is because if you have knowledge, you clearly have belief. So therefore, it is a type of belief. It is a more confident form of belief. That's what knowledge would be on that scale.
That's why I'm thinking I don't understand everything you guys are saying about agnostic atheists, because it seems like you could say I don't believe in something and I don't have knowledge of it, even though I don't have knowledge of it. But is inherent. As soon as you say I don't believe, you obviously don't have knowledge.
Right, but knowledge has nothing to do with anything. If you the only way you can attach an epistemic modifier to say I don't have knowledge of this is if at first you say I believe this, but I don't have knowledge of it.
Yes, no, I agree. I would say
that's not what the soft.
I would say that if you classify yourself as an atheist, one that doesn't believe, then I would say you are inherently an agnostic. It couldn't be any other way. You couldn't be a Gnostic atheist.
Well, actually, this is the opposite. If you're a hard atheist, you're inherently an agnostic atheist by that standard. If you're going to use agnosticism as an epistemic modifier, then it is only going to make any kind of sense, and it's redundant. It's actually superfluous if you're a hard atheist. And this is what Dillahunty says as well to Anthony Magna Bosco.
That may be my lack of understanding, because I think two positions that I know that must logically follow is that if you're Gnostic, or to say you have knowledge, then you must be a theist. Those are things that must follow. And in reverse, the contrapositive of that, if you are agnostic, if you're an atheist, then you must be agnostic.
No,
so
that makes sense at all.
I wouldn't see why if you're an atheist, you must be agnostic, because you couldn't have.
No, but that's not what the word. That's not what it means. If I say agnostic atheist, the only way to really parse that out is to say, as a soft atheist, is I lack a belief, but I don't know if I lack a belief or not. That's how it reads. Now, I don't think that's not what they mean when they say that, but that's what it translates to.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's what it translates to. I don't see why but you just keep saying it silly. I'm trying to ask you why it's silly.
As Ozzy said, Steve, have MP watch my latest video on the subject. It includes a video of Dillahunty saying that agnostic atheist makes no sense on the lack theist or soft theist definition. And I don't know.
Maybe that's just a good. Maybe I gotta watch the video.
Yeah, watch the video. I'll send it to you later. I think it's a very good video.
I don't know.
Steve, you know what the. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't pronounce Magna Bosco's name very well. He's gonna forget. If he ever watches this, he's gonna. Oh, but we are gonna have a longer hangout eventually. I have to have some off airs first on street epistemology, because I do want to talk about that. I do wanted to present what I think are problems, but I don't want to do it negatively, because I think Anthony is a very nice guy. He's very, very nice. I think that. There are just concerns that I have with it. That's all. Maybe he can address them. I don't know. I don't want to be negative to him. I don't want to critique it in a way that turns him off, because I actually think he's pretty nice, and I think that he'd be a great addition to have in the discussions like this. And I think he's got a good heart. I don't think he does anything like his street epistemology is not like presuppositionalism, which I think comes from dishonest place, right? I don't think street epistemology comes from a dishonest place at all. Did you guys don't know street epistemology? You never watched any of the street epistemology videos?
This is my first. Never seen his. Oh, I mean, you talking about on his channel? No.
Yeah, but I mean, there's other people that do street epistemology too. I've known what street epistemology was for a very long time. I just didn't know that he was the one that really kind of pushed this. And I don't remember the guy's name that started it, Dr. something or other. But I mean, it would be fun to do, but I would do more of a modified street epistemological approach, because I find that the approach that they make kind of locks them into one type of narrative, and it's so focused on evidentialism that it doesn't take into account any other things for justifying one's beliefs. And I'm a non-evidentialist, so that to me, yeah, Dr. Peter Bogason, how you pronounce his name? Thank you. As somebody who thinks that an evidence, assuming to a empiricist approach, that you have to have some kind of empiricism or physical evidence to justify your beliefs, I don't particularly believe that. I think that's a great, obviously, way to justify. But I believe that you can be pragmatic or even prudential to have a belief that can be fully justified, even if the evidence doesn't exist, or even if the evidence goes against what you would think that would be the case. I don't adhere to Clifford's principle. Now, I would love to get MJ's view on that, because being the philosopher, what I just said, does that sound too out there? Is that radical, or?
Yeah, in terms of
I'm pretty. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
How radical do I sound by saying that, or does it make sense?
Very Jamesian. I'm not really familiar with a lot of pragmatic epistemology, but William James did say something along those lines, where you could actually be prudential and pragmatic with your beliefs, with forming your beliefs.
All right, so it doesn't sound too radical then.
No, not from that perspective.
I don't really think it is. This is something I've looked into quite extensively, because I'm a prudential. I am a pragmatic person. I believe in pragmatism. I also think that when it comes to empiricism, I think that there's a fine balance between empiricism and rationalism. I don't know how you can subscribe to just one and not take into account the other. Although empiricists at one time used to do that, correct?
Exactly. That's why I adhere to a kind of contextualism, where you apply these different epistemological contexts relative to the context you're in. So if you're in an empirical context, you have an empirical criterion. If you're in an everyday context, you probably have a pluralistic, basket full of criteria that you use with assessing knowledge claims or belief claims. But just to be monolithic about it and try to apply this one criterion.
That's what I see. Oh, I'm going to steal that. I like that, monolithic. I think the street epistemology is a monolithic approach. Can I steal that from you? I'm going to anyways. But but I like that. That's brilliant. That's a good way to word it. I find it to be a very monolithic approach.
Yeah, and it's a position. There's pros and cons out there for it, but as far as universalizing it to this overarching epistemology to be, trickled down to every single epistemological context, it just seems like it's overkill, kind of goes against my own experience. I know you can probably utilize proper basicality.
Well, I do to a point. Okay. As a foundationist, as my theory of truth, I do believe that I start off with properly basic beliefs, right? I believe that they are they cannot be inferentially justified. Well, then just to me, they can't be inferentially justified. They can't be internally justified, because there's something that I take axiomatically, right? I'm okay with that, but for when people come in and they do this kind of precept, they basically want to argue, well, how do you know that? And I just I take it axiomatically. I don't have to provide a justification for it if it's a brute fact to me.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. You're completely justified in holding your properly basic beliefs without being able to even provide justification, without the existence of justification.
But to them, that's unheard of, right? But you got to remember, from their point of view, that's nonsensical. And it's like, wait a minute, are you doing an internal critique or an external critique? Make up your mind here.
Exactly. What's happening there is they shift very surreptitiously to me. They shift from talking about an actual knowledge claim to knowledge claims about knowledge claims. And
exactly.
No, once we should.
There's a lot of meta
Steve,
stuff going on here.
it's
but yeah,
it's been great, man. I gotta head out, man. I gotta get up pretty early.
thanks, Heather.
Good night, man.
I brought this up the other day. Do you remember much about logical positivism, where you basically is a theory of knowledge where the only way you could even formulate that a position or proposition has any kind of cognitive meaning is through strictly empirical observations.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I think that's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
But I've actually had people tell me that that's the approach they take. And I'm like, you know, you're espousing logical positivism. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense. I'm totally that. Unless you can empirically observe it, it doesn't happen. I'm like, there's just so many fundamentally things wrong with this.
Well,
but that's what they drive. But that's what they have to resort to in order to maintain this absolute atheistic, ontologically natural mindset of theirs.
It was first proposed as a criterion of meaning at first, and I think it got extended over into epistemology. But they were basically just saying, you know, these propositions of religion and ethics and aesthetics and all these things were completely meaningless if they couldn't be verified.
Right, aesthetics were. There's a lot of philosophers, correct me if I'm wrong, that just thought aesthetics had no. It was basically useless.
Well, it was meaningless, and
meaningless. Yeah.
What Wittgenstein did, because he accidentally started that whole movement in the Vienna Circle. When he published his Tractatus, he saw where it was going, and he completely disagreed with where the Vienna Circle was taking his ideas. And he thought that, yeah, you got to, you know, the mysterious Proposition 7, that which we cannot say, we have to remain silent. Yes, that's true, but that doesn't mean it's completely meaningless. And so he started to shift away from that picture theory of meaning that he had in the Tractatus and tried to confine it to languages, which is where you get about before, these knowledge claims, and the knowledge claims about knowledge claims. So you got languages, then you have languages about languages. And that's the meta question. And the way you conceptualize that is through this idea of language games and things like that, where you actually have meaning within these games, even though they don't play by the empirical game. So, I mean,
that reminds me. I wonder if Ozzy is even still listening. I wonder if he had a chance to. I wrote a little blurb on Noam Chomsky's colorless green idea, sleep furiously, because I think that's the expression that Ozzy likes to use a lot, or he likes a variant of it. I don't really know, but I think he uses actually Chomsky's actual title. But I had written something on that in the Great Debate Community, and I really wanted to get Ozzy's approach on it. Can I send it to you?
Oh, sure, no problem.
All right, I'll link you on it.
Thank you.
Because I was just my mind was going. You ever get one of those positions where your just mind goes 1,000 miles an hour?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what it was. And I was just spewing this shit out, and didn't even know what the hell was coming out. I just was like, okay, this is probably gonna be one of the dumbest things I've ever written, or it actually might make sense. I don't know, but either way, I don't really care, to be honest with you. It's out there. People might go, "What the hell is that? It sucks. It's stupid." I'll be like, okay, moving on to some other argument. I'm not going to care if I embarrass myself. I'm never going to learn anything about why it was completely fucked up if I don't put something out there, right?
Fortune favors the bold.
There you go. And so does criticism. Trust me. Lots of criticism. But that's okay. But I'll get that to you. But anyways, did you get the link to Ozzy's video? No, you're not. Well, anyways, guys, I think it's time that we pretty much call this to a close. Ozzy hasn't looked at it yet. When you get a chance, still, I'm really kind of curious, because I mean, I was like, I'm just snowballing this crap right now, but it may be the worst thing I ever written, or it might actually make sense. I don't know, but I really am curious. I want Ozzy's opinion on it, because Ozzy loves that phrase. I think that's the phrase he uses, isn't it? Colorless green.
Well, the same
ideas
happens that you're aware of, because you're really knowledgeable with the science. You submit stuff for peer review. You know, you have the light bulb moment. That's just the first step. So get ready for a battle.
Yeah, no, and you know, I like being shocked, dude. The other day, I actually had something using a little bit of predicate knowledge that I had some really good feedback on, and I mean, it wasn't like wrong or anything, I don't think, but it was some good feedback. And one of the person who was giving me feedback, Dave Allen, I think his last name, or Dave, it was really one of the best conversations I've had in a very long time. It was straight up just, hey Steve, how about this? Why is this? And it was like I was defending it, but in a positive way.
Exactly. It's constructive.
It was very constructive. And the only downside was because he understood the topic, clearly he understood it, he was doing it pretty much propositionally rather than in natural language, which I think may have prevented a lot of other people from joining in on the conversation. Because I'm not that familiar with predicate calculus. I'm trying to learn it. But I think that people see the math and they go, oh, I don't want to touch that. Which sucks. And I wish more people would just jump into it and
just start at the very beginning and take it one step at a time. It's actually really fulfilling.
Well, it was a great dude. These like one of the other threads that I was talking about actually started to get into really interesting things about category. Actually, no, it was this one. It was about categories, and I was basically just trying to show that theism and non-theism are categories. Talking about a universal category and complement sets and set theory, but at the same time, Ozzy had brought up the thing about theological non-cognitivist.
Mm-hmm.
To a theological non-cognitivist, they're going to be upset if you call them a theist or if you call them a non-theist.
Mm-hmm.
Which I was like, okay, but they've got to be one or the other logically. But in their mind's eye, they don't even know what the hell these things would mean. They to them, it's not something you can give value. You can put them into a category,
mm-hmm.
which I think is very fascinating for theological non-cog.
Well, they would utilize the categories for conceptual convenience in order to actually talk about a position.
If they wanted to, but from an external point of view, I could put them in an external category. I could say, look, you're not a theist. I'm going to put you under non-theism because you don't meet the criteria for what I've set forth to be a theist. But to them, they're going to balk at that, would they not?
Well, hold on, but that I don't know if that would even matter, even if they balked at it, because definitionally, you're talking about it's something that must be true. It must be true that they're not a theist. They don't believe in a God.
But it goes beyond
that just must be true.
We're talking about because a theological non-cognitivist maintains the position that the proposition could not even be evaluated because it makes no sense. There could be no truth value assigned to it. You cannot put them in either category because these are nonsensical categories.
But Steve, it's not like you can choose not to be in a category. The fact of the matter is, if you can only be a theist by affirming the proposition, yes. If you don't say yes that you believe in a God, you are definition not a theist, and you call that non-theism. It is not. I don't see how.
But it'd be a category error. It'd be a category error. That's the point.
I don't know.
I mean, MJ, should we want to jump in real quick?
I was just going to say.
You know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, you can take three stances on any proposition P. You can either affirm it, deny it, or say it's meaningless. And that's kind of what you can get out of any. Oh, right. That's the fourth. Exactly. My bad. And the theological non-cognitivists would go with that position that P is meaningless. So where I would part with them with regard to categorization is that I wouldn't think that they can't be categorized, but I think what they're objecting to is the categorization first two options of affirmation or denial.
But just for clarification, what we're saying is the difference between non-theists, which is an affirmation, and everything else. We're not actually even separating those other three categories.
Right.
So even though you're making the distinction doesn't matter in this particular situation because theist is an affirmation, and anything that doesn't affirm, we are calling non-theist. So I don't understand.
But MP, you're failing to understand what theological cognitivist means in this case, though. I could as an external person make the case for that. I can show, and I did use in predicate calculus and just how universal complement sets work with each other, right? Anything that's not in set A must be in the complement set of A, right? And the universal set is the elements from both of them combined, right?
Correct.
But Ozzy, Ozzy, you want to come in and jump in? He says he'll help explain this to MP real quick. But yeah, I'm pretty sure Ozzy's going to say exactly what I'm saying here. But to a theological cognitivist, they don't even know what these categories are. They cannot even think that there's any meaning to them. It's like, hey, MP, are you in a or are you in a not category? You can't evaluate it because you don't know what means.
it's just like someone saying, "Are you in, the Homo sapien category?" And if I didn't know what that means, that doesn't in some way invalidate the fact that I am part of this particular category. But one thing I do want to say is that just on the point, if I just asked you the question, are theological non-cognitivists theist? The way you answer that question will validate my point. If you say they are,
cognitivist answer.
If you say no, well, if we agree logically they are, then they are theist. And this word we're talking about isn't the word theism. If you're saying they're not theist, then I think my point is validated because we're saying that they are everything but this particular category, which we.
But MP, again, you're not understanding it from a theological non-cog point of view. Sure, I could do that. I have intentionality. I can actually make those decisions to do that, to choose between which one they go into, okay? But the cognitive does not have that. They do not have the ability to choose between one or the other because neither one makes sense to them. That's why they're theological non-cogs. They think the proposition cannot have any kind of truth value or not truth value associated with it. Well, I guess truth value kind of incorporates both, but Ozzy, do you want to come real quick, or I'm going to be like ending this? And MJ, I know you got to run. Yeah, he took off, but that was a good discussion, MJ. I'm glad you're back around, Slash, because I do remember you from Nadia's room, and we had some great conversations. And I'm sorry that they treated you so poor back then. But anyways, Ozzy, do you want to come in real quick, or does it matter? I guess we'll continue another time. I'll give him another minute.
Yeah, I think he said he was jumping in. But I will say I think I understand your point now, because your point, which I accept, is that a theological non-cognitivist wouldn't even accept any category or even that the questions may even make sense. And I agree with that argument. I would accept that. But my counter to that is if we are trying to define these positions and place them in particular categories, I was under the impression that the affirmation of theism was unique in the way where if you weren't that, then you're defined as everything else, which we were saying is non-theism. And that was my understanding. So even though what you're saying is true, I believe theological non-cognitivists would say, I don't care about this particular question.
Well, it's not they don't care. That'd be an apathy.
Sorry, but
they don't
I
care.
would also say my position is also true. Where if they don't affirm theism, then they are definitionally non-theist. And maybe they don't have to affirm or not affirm, but that's just my thinking, that since they're not affirming that claim, then they are non-theists.
Go ahead,
Ozzy. Hi. Okay. The difficulty for what you're saying, MP, is it presupposes the intelligibility of the question. So if you say, "But do you believe God exists, or do you believe theism, or does God exist?" You're saying that if they say yes to any of those questions, then they're a theist. And if they don't answer yes to that, then they're a non-theist, right? Now, that's fine so long as you think that questions like, does God exist? Are you a theist? Do you believe in God? Things like that. As long as those questions are meaningful. But to a theological non-cognitivist, those questions are literally meaningless. They have no truth value, right? So you're asking them to answer yes or no to a question that isn't a yes/no question, which is why I gave an example last time we spoke on this. We touched on the theological non-cognitivist business, and I said, look, imagine I come up to you and I say, what's the difference between a duck? And you say to me, huh? And I said, it's a simple question. What's the difference between a duck? What's your answer? And you'll say, listen, Ozzy, I know that sounds like a question. It starts with the word what and it ends with a question mark, and it has the grammatical structure of a question. But that's not a question. It's ill-posed. You're confused. You're just mucking about with words. It's meaningless. Okay. And supposing I said to you, look, the answer is either lemons or not. You're either a lemonist or you're not a lemonist. Which is it? Now, well, which is it? Are you a lemonist? You'll say, well, I'm not a lemonist, but I'm not a non-lemonist either. And the lemonist example, by the way, credit for that goes to Alex Malpass, who suggested I use that in explicating the example of what's the difference between a duck. You're insisting that there are two possibilities, lemonist or not lemonist. And so to a theological non-cognitivist, you're asking him, are you a lemonist or not non-lemonist? And what the hell is a lemonist? This question doesn't make sense. You're asking me about the existence of God. So the way that we normally proceed in these discussions is we assume the intelligibility of the question, and then we're dividing everyone up into theist or non-theist, or atheist or agnostic, and we carve them up accordingly, all under the presupposition that the question is intelligible, okay, and admits of a truth value, right, which is either thought true, false, or unknown, right? But the theological non-cognitivist is asking a question that is logically prior to that. The theological non-cognitivist is answering a question prior to is it true or false, but rather is it meaningful? Before a question can be true or false, it at least has to be meaningful. And so they're saying, look, it can't be true or false. No one can be a theist. No one can be a non-theist. No one can be an agnostic. No one can be an apatheist. No one can be an anti-theist. That's all just gobbledygook, okay? You're all just talking nonsense. These are not the names of positions, okay? You're all just confused. This is a discourse. It's like walking into a culture where people are talking about colorless green ideas and if they sleep furiously or not. And there are some people who think they do, and some people think that they don't. Some people think that how can they be colorless? Well, they're colorless this way, but they're green in some other respect. And there's all this elaborate, sophisticated discourse that's gone on for millennia. And they all think that they're talking sensibly. And then you join the conversation, you go, this is all stupid talk. All of this is stupid talk. There's no such thing as a non-theist, says the non-cognitivist. You can't be a non-theist. The question doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter if you phrase it as, you believe there's a God? Is there a God? Is there no God? It doesn't matter how you phrase it. As they see it, all God talk is literally meaningless, has no truth value. And consequently, to try to characterize people as either being believers or not believers in the truth of the proposition is impossible, because there's no truth or falsity to the proposition. Right? So that's why. So the question presupposes that it has a truth value and that it's intelligible. And once we presuppose that, and I presuppose that too, I don't believe in theological non-cognitivism. So I'm willing to put theological. What's that?
I was just say you don't believe they exist. No, I'm just kidding.
No. I believe the position. I believe the position is untenable. So I am willing to say to a theological non-cognitivist, well, I think you belong in the non-theist category. I'm willing to say that. But when I do that, I am begging the question against their position. I'm assuming the falsity of theological non-cognitivism. I'm assuming that the question is cognitive, that it has a truth value, right? And so to have a typology that insists that they fall under theism or non-theism is to have a typology that denies their position at all, right? In other words, if what you're saying is true, that everyone falls into either theism or non-theism, then there's no such thing as a theological non-cognitivist, right?
Well, I want to be sure there would be. And let me go and just answer I just want to respond to a couple of points that you made. The first point was about logically prior, that they have to have this understanding of what the question means logically prior. And I'm thinking in the conversation that we're having, none of us are theological non-cognitivists. We're having a conversation about of individuals who classify themselves as this, and what would in which more or less above category would best describe their position. And we have theism, which we all agreed was a position of affirmation. You had to affirm to be a theist, and again, last time we spoke, you guys defined anyone who doesn't affirm that position as non-theist. So theological non-cognitivists, even if I'm not asking them, just understanding with their position, since they, by definition, aren't affirming the claim of theism, they're saying something else, then using the definition that you guys put forth, I was classifying them as non-theist, because that seemed to be the qualifying. So when you made the distinction between lemon and lemonist, it's true, that's a great distinction, but we were only asking, do you believe in lemons? I wasn't asking, do you believe in non-lemons? I'm just asking,
No.
do you believe in lemons? The question was structured to all this we were talking about is really contingent on their response to the position of affirmation.
They can't. No, but they're saying there's no affirming it. They're saying you can't get as far as affirming it.
Exactly,
and you can't get as no. But nobody can. Is what they're saying. If they don't affirm it, they are not a theist. No, you're not understanding. They don't affirm it. It's that it's unaffirmable by anyone. Right. That's their position. By the way, it's unaffirmable.
But Ozzy, couldn't the argument then carry over, because these are intentional concepts, right? So
intentional with an S, yes.
Could you not carry it over to saying, well, rocks are not non-theists for the same reason?
Well, yeah. If you define it extensionally, then rocks are atheists. Right? If you want,
no, not rocks are atheists, but
non-theists
or non-theists. Non-theists.
Rocks are they don't have the ability to determine between intentional concepts. So could you not? I mean, rocks would be in this case theological-cognitivists in that regard. And rocks have no state. Can we just assume them into non-theism for that?
That's true. That's actually kind of ingenious. I'll have to think about that. But yeah, I think you could just as easily say that rocks are theological.
That's the argument. That's one of the arguments I was making that you didn't read, by the way.
Oh, sorry. I haven't read it yet. But yeah, no, I think that's kind of clever. I'd never thought of that. One could just as easily say that they're theological non-cognitivists as atheists. I need to think that through. I'll have to think that through. Okay, so the difficulty. So let me be clear so that I'm not misunderstood here. I reject theological non-cognitivism, and what that means is I don't think that they're right when they say that God talk is meaningless blather. Okay, that there's no fact of the matter about whether or not there's a God or not. That there's no truth value to whether or not there's a God. I think there's a truth value. It's either true or false as I see it, right? But that is to say that I deny that the tenability of their position. So I'm perfectly content when I assume that their position isn't true to lump them in with all other non-theists, okay? But when I do that, it has to be understood that when I do that, I am unfairly, I am prejudiciously ignoring their position and not. I am miscategorizing them in a neutral typology. A typology of positions has to try to be neutral. It has to at least not assume the veracity of a certain position or class of positions, right? So the way we normally do it is we ask, is theism true, or does a God exist, or do you believe in a God? And then we break everyone down into two, right? Those that say yes and those that say anything else, okay? Or those that don't say yes, let's say that, okay? But the idea is that there's actually a fork that happens before that, right? The things break down before that. First, you have to ask, is the question meaningful or not? If you think it's meaningful, you're a cognitivist with respect to the question. Okay, and then everyone else can be either theist, atheist, agnostic, whatever you want to, every other position that you can come up with. Okay, and then there are the non-cognitivists. Okay, and they don't fall into any of those because they're not cognitivists, and so they don't think that the question is meaningful, right? So I mean, if you wanted to have like a sort of branching diagram where everyone gets broken down into their ultimate individual positions, right? A set of nested hierarchies. You would start with the first question: is the question of God's existence cognitive? Does it have a truth value? Can it be true or false? Yes or no? All right. And if you say no, you're a non-cognitivist. That's it. End of the story. You're done. Okay. But if you say yes, then we can say, okay, well, now do you think that it's true? Yes or no? And then we can break you down into theist and non-theist. And then we can break the theists down into smaller categories, polytheist, monotheist. We can bring all the non-theists down into agnostics, atheists, strong and weak forms of atheism and so forth, right? So I think that's how the diagram has to go. You have to start with, first, is the question meaningful? And then then people break down. But the point is, if we do it that way, then theological non-cognitivists don't get included in the question. Don't get included in with the non-theists, because to put them there is to assume that the position is wrong. That it's to assume that the question has a truth value, but their whole position is precisely it doesn't have a truth value. So you are misrepresenting their position. You're putting them in with all the people who think that the question has a truth value. right? And their position is precisely, it doesn't have a truth value. So please don't put me in that category. And that's why I think that they are not even non-theists. I will put them in non-theist in my typology because I think the question is cognitive. But if I want to adopt a neutral position where I don't assume that my own position is true, I'm going to put them in their own category where they will be.
And that's and there have people that argued that they would have their own category.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, sure.
But something that you said, and maybe this is the confusion, but you said it doesn't have a truth value. They're saying that statement doesn't have a truth value. They're not saying it's true, and they're not saying it's false. In other words, I don't believe in God, whether I do not believe in. The reason why it seems like you're saying is because there's a separate question that precedes it about whether they even consider this question to be meaningful. But just like, I disagree with that, with the way you're kind of formulating it, because we put people in categories all the time and who don't know why they're in this particular category. Like I have a 6-year-old daughter, and if I ask her now, do you believe you're a Homo sapien? That will be a meaningless question to her, but
Sure.
That still wouldn't change the fact that there's a category of Homo sapiens that she will fit into, because that's the way we're generalizing understanding it. So I'm trying to understand it from that same model, that even though these people say we don't understand or that question is meaningless, we have made a determination, though, based on responses, based on someone affirming one particular position. We've defined them as X, and we've defined everyone else as Y. And I'm asking that because it seems like you're making the argument that the theological non-cognitivist can somehow all be a theist or a non-theist in certain situations. So I would respectfully say if there's really no situation in which a theological non-cognitivist can be a theist, then that seems to even support the fact that they are non-theists even more, because by definition, if you're not a theist, then you are a non-theist, the way we've been defining it.
Okay, when you say by definition, if you're not a theist, you're a non-theist, that is again, the way that sentence needs to go is assuming the question is intelligible, right? If you're not a theist, then you're a non-theist. Right? Then I would say, yes, that's correct. And that's why I would put even theological non-cognitivists into the non-theist camp, right? But if you want to be neutral about this, if you want to extract yourself from your own commitment here that the question is meaningful, so as to fairly represent the position of the theological non-cognitivist, what you have to do is say, well, wait a minute, they don't think the question is meaningful. So the way to interpret the way the Venn diagram works, what you're trying to do is you have a Venn diagram, right? And you have everyone who has an opinion on the question of God, or doesn't have an opinion. You just got a Venn diagram of everybody, okay? And then there's the subset of theists, and then there's everybody else in the larger set of all people, okay? So theists are a subset of everybody, and everybody else who isn't a theist is a non-theist, right? But that Venn diagram assumes that the question is intelligible and that the God talk is meaningful, such that you can say of a person they are either a theist or a non-theist, right? The theological non-cognitivists, right? I mean, those who actually know what the position is. There's a lot of atheists out there who call themselves non-cognitivists who don't know.
And by the way, can I get on record? Because I used to kind of say I was a theological non-cog, only because I didn't know how to evaluate the thing. I didn't know if you even could, and I knew it wasn't a true theological non-cognitive. That's why I had that little modifier. But I don't no longer do that any longer at all, because I totally think the propositions are able to be evaluated. So I don't even refer to myself even as a semi-theological non-cog anymore, because I've learned more about how this works.
Right. So MP, you and I agree that the question is intelligible, so it makes sense for us to want to classify everyone under that, right? But the point is, when we do that, it is unfair to the theological non-cognitivists. We are not properly classifying them. They will say, no, it's impossible to be in either category. See, what you're trying to say is, look, if the shoe fits, you have to wear it, and I agree. If a descriptor fits, okay, then you fall under that description. But what they're saying is, I don't fall under that description. because your Venn diagram is if the question of God's existence is intelligible, and you don't assume and you don't believe God exists, then you're non-theist, right? But there's this rider, there's this qualifier, right?
Well,
if the question is meaningful.
Hold on, I just wanted to correct that statement. The question would only be, do you believe in a God? If yes, that's it. Anything else, you don't. The other side of, you have to believe God doesn't exist, or you don't believe in a God. You don't even have to ask that. Only thing you have to ask: do you believe a God exists?
No, that's all you have to. Yes. No, but that question, okay, is, I'm getting a lot of feedback from somebody. Okay, that question assumes that it's intelligible. So. The idea is that a person, for theological non-cognitivists, it's impossible to believe in a God. It's impossible to disbelieve a God, right? It just, the whole discourse is so polluted and confused that it's literally meaningless, right? So you're asking a question to them that sounds like, what's the difference between a duck, right? It'd be like me asking, do colorless green ideas sleep furiously or something like that, or some other string of nonsense that sounds like a proper question but isn't. And then you go, huh? And I say, look, the answer is either, look, you only got two options. You're either a Leninist or a non-Leninist. And you go, what the hell does Leninist have to do? I don't even know what a Leninist is, right? What they're saying is, I don't know what a theist is, right? Well, and it's not. So it's not that they're complaining that they need to know what a theist is so that they know where to put themselves, or so that, right? It's that there's no such thing as a theist.
But that's the same token.
There's no such thing as a Leninist. It's a meaningless word.
Can I make the point though? Oh, go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry.
If an atheist, see, I've heard there's only a couple, but I have ran across somebody saying that an atheist theological non-cog, and I'm like, wait a minute, how could he be atheist theological non-cog? That's a complete. That's completely nonsensical, right? Because if you're a theological non-cog, then you can't even make sense of the question. So how could you take the position of atheism?
I don't know if it's taking the position or just being defined as something you're not. It's funny because atheism is one of those few words that defines an anti-position. Like you don't usually have, like, you're not an astronomer. There's no word to define that. So it's
right, but you could phrase it the other way. You could make not the astronomer.
That's not true. That's not true. Non-cognitivist is someone who's not a cognitivist.
Yeah, but it's not like
that is the category. That is the category. Good point. Yeah, exactly. The non-cognitivist is the category. But you could turn anything into a category.
I wasn't saying that was the only that was the only one. But it's rare that we do. There are limited amounts of words that we used with this. But
I think probably. I mean, I'm going to guess here, but I mean, what there's more of, we probably make that the category, or not always the case. But I mean, I think it would make, or excuse me, less of. It would make no sense to make not an astronomer category, because astronomy.
Yeah, even though it's only going to say not an astronomer, but why not? Because that category would just be too big. And the one thing is that we keep going back to this, and what I like to do is understand this argument that Ozzy's putting forth, but I'm just going to use it in a different meaning. If I, like, when I asked my daughter, do you believe in Homo sapiens, and she said, and that question to her is a meaningless question. She doesn't understand what these things are, because she's only 6. She's not been introduced to the concept. It's meaningless in that sense. So, but that doesn't mean that there are no,
that there isn't a meaning,
that there isn't Homo sapiens, sure. Or that doesn't even mean that those categories are meaningless. That yes, there are Homo sapiens, there are not Homo sapiens. So what I'm asking is that just because she doesn't, even if I asked her, is she Homo sapien, and she couldn't understand that question, that doesn't change the fact that she is, and she fits within that category.
She's not arguing from a theological non-cog point of view, though.
No. But what I'm asking is that if we're asking, you guys have restricted it so much, so we have to ask a theological how they would view themselves versus logically what fits.
But you're saying that, but the difference is the difference is the non-cog is
be a theist, and it seems logically they cannot. They are barred from being a theist, and I'm trying to understand why you guys are not agreeing that they would be in this category of non-theism, because Ozzy says he agrees with me in principle, like he agrees with that, but he then goes back to this much narrow position of, well, a theological non-cognitivist wouldn't think.
No.
I agree with
one is a position neutral typology, right? What I'm recommending here is that we have to adopt a position neutral typology. If we're going to break everyone down into the type of position that they have, right? We have to make sure that our typology doesn't deny what they actually believe is the case, right? It's no good to have a typology of what people's beliefs are that denies that they believe it, right? That's no good, right? So imagine if I had a typology of atheists, and the only kind of atheist you could be was the kind of atheist that says all gods are impossible and I can demonstrate it, right? And then you say, well, wait a minute, that's all that atheism can be? I mean, wait a second, can't there be other kinds of atheists, right? You've got to have a typology that accommodates every position, right? So what you have is a typology that has no room for the theological non-cognitivist, because you're putting them in the non-theist group, right? Remember, this is a typology of what people believe, and you put the theological non-cognitivist group into the group of people who don't believe in theism, right? You are assuming that non-theism is meaningful. It doesn't matter that they don't know. I mean, it doesn't matter if they don't know these terms. There are theological non-cognitivists out there who don't know of the term theological non-cognitivism, and they'll let you put them in any old category because they haven't thought about it or anything like that, right? But the point is, when you put them in that category, you are putting them in that category, and thus denying what they actually believe. You are saying. You're saying I'm putting.
You're saying they have no valid position.
Yeah, you're putting them in a group of people where it is at least possible for the position to be true, that there's a God, right? They don't think that there's a God. Okay, no atheist or agnostic is committed to the proposition that there's a God, but they're committed to the proposition that it's at least intelligible. Okay, so it's not that they. So they're not even getting as far as lacking a belief. The position of the theological non-cognitivist is, that category you're trying to put me in, non-theist? It's not a category.
That's exactly it.
Doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a non-theist. Nobody can belong to the category non-theist. It's like belonging to the category non-Leninist. What the is a Leninist, right? So if you don't know what a Leninist is, you can't know what a non-Leninist is. It's just meaningless. Stop trying to call me a Leninist when you ask me what's the difference between a duck, a non-Leninist. How could I be? Nobody can be a non-Leninist. It's not that I don't want to be called a non-Leninist. Nobody can be a Nobody actually fits the description of non-Leninist, because nobody could even fit the description of a Leninist either. Nobody can be a theist. Nobody can be an atheist. Nobody can be an agnostic, according to the theological non-cognitivist. That's the difficulty here, right? So you put them in the non-theist category, as I'm inclined to do, only on the assumption that the position is bullshit, right? If you think their position is complete BS, okay, as I do, then it makes sense to put them there, right? But if you want to be fair to their position and have a typology that is neutral with respect to people's own descriptions of their positions, you can't put them in the non-theist camp, I would submit.
Yeah, and I think there's a justification for saying that the theological non-cog position is bullshit. I think there's reasons why we can.
Yeah, there are reasons why I think that. Yeah. But I mean,
it's not like you just say, oh well, they have. But I don't want people to think, oh well, here's a position that Ozzy thinks, oh, it's just not a good enough position. There are reasons why. That is just it doesn't.
Yeah, there are reasons why I am not a theological non-cognitivist and why I don't want to put people there. The reason I'm not going into those reasons is I don't want people have a tendency to, they hear an argument against a certain position, and if they find the argument convincing, then they don't want to hear about how you would typify that position, where you would put it in a typology. And so what I'm recommending here is that we recognize that this position is a position that does not grant the meaningfulness of the question, so that if you're talking to a theological non-cognitivist, they're going to tell you you're not a non-theist. I don't care if you call yourself an agnostic, if you call yourself an atheist or an agnostic atheist or whatever. You can't be any of those things. Ain't no such thing. Nobody properly belongs in that category.
Ozzy, aren't they at the same time? Aren't they like not valuing your position by doing that?
Yes. The theological non-cognitivist is in the business of saying, all of you theists, all of you agnostics, all of you atheists, right? All of you apatheists, all of you anti-theists, you're all out to lunch. You don't know. You think you are talking intelligibly because people have been using these words for so long. There's this long, rich discourse that, and so you think it's meaningful, okay? But it's like landing on a planet where people have been debating for millennia about the nature and quality of colorless green ideas and whether or not they sleep furiously. It doesn't matter that they've been doing this for a long time and that they all think that they know what they're talking about. There's no two people in the world talking about colorless green ideas who know what they're talking about. They're all equivocating all over the place. There's no two people with the same God concept, right? No two people know what omnipotence means. They all mean something different, right? All these attributes about the gods, right? That's what motivates theological non-cognitivism, is a sense of an absolutely irreducible and irresolvable mass conceptual confusion and equivocation that renders the entire discourse literally meaningless, right? And so that's why they don't want to be subsumed in any of these categories, because to subsume them in any of these categories is to deny that they're right, is to say, well, no, your theological non-cognitive position is wrong. Well, and they're saying, well, thank you very much not to assume that my position is wrong when you categorize me.
The reality is, why is the theological non-cog even weighing in on the whole thing?
Well,
I think it's perfectly okay if you think a discourse is polluted to come along and say this whole discourse is nonsense. I think that's. I mean,
yeah, I guess okay. In that regard, sure.
I just think they're mistaken, but I don't think that they have no business doing it.
I do want to address 2 points that Ozzy made, which maybe I think is the back and forth here that I just can't get over personally, maybe, and that is that this fact of the question between theism and non-theism, and why I'm disagreeing with you, gentlemen. And when I'm trying to the point I'm trying to get across is that when I talk about theism, I'm talking about the question, do you believe a God exists, and the affirmation of that claim. And as a consequence, anyone who doesn't affirm that claim, just as a consequence, is the other thing. And I don't care what label you put on, it's just they're just not them. And we talked about theological non-cognitives. In this particular diagram, I asked the question, do they fit within this defined category? Just like, if we had any other thing and we set up a category and we say, does this thing fit in this defined category? And you say no, then as a consequence, they would automatically go into the other category. It's like something being symmetrical, and I say, well, or not symmetrical. You can't, if you say it's not. If it's not symmetrical, then by definition, it's asymmetrical. So that's the way.
I love that example. Here's why.
That's the way, but that's the way I'm understanding it.
No, that's perfectly right. No, you're seeing it in terms of set theory, which is right. Look, if you've got a set of all people, and there's a subset of all people who, have a certain quality, like believing in a God, right, or being symmetrical or something. It doesn't matter what the property is. And then there's everybody else, right? Well, then that everybody else, you can call that a category, right? You can call it, non-theism or non-symmetry or whatever. Okay? But here's what imagine that someone was not a theological non-cognitivist, but a geometric non-cognitivist, and you say, look, do you believe that a five-pointed star is symmetrical or not? And they go, there's no such thing as symmetry. What the hell are you talking about? Oh, so you're a non-symmetricist. And they'll go, there's no such, it's meaningless to talk of symmetry. So there can't be any meaning to the expression non-symmetrist. Okay, there's no such, would you stop talking like that? Would you stop trying to put me into one of these categories?
Well,
there's no such thing as symmetry, and there's no such thing as...
I just want to clear up a point. Just one quick point that you made. Sure. I am not saying that just because you don't believe it's symmetrical, you now believe it's not symmetrical. What
No,
I'm
no,
saying
no, 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 no.
as a
No,
consequence, just as a consequence of saying you're not a theist, then you're whatever else.
I got
No,
to so we got to kind of wrap this up.
Okay.
I do got to end it soon, but MP, I think the point is set theory. What you're saying is absolutely right. This is what I wrote in the GDC. What you're saying absolutely is correct. But what you're not doing is you're not taking it. You're looking at it from our point of view, from like the people looking in, going, look, we all think that this is a proposition can be evaluated. We all think that there is a truth value being assigned. Look, you're right. If you're not a theist, you are categorically in non-theism. That we all basically agree on that, I think. But you're a theological non-cog. Since they don't know what these categories are, you're not giving their position any value, because you're now saying, well, it doesn't matter. You can't evaluate this. We're going to evaluate it for you. Right. And that's not a fair position to take to them.
I think it's a little worse than that. It's not, because I think it's fair to put people into a category, even if they don't think the category.
Well, I do too, because I think non-cog is shit at this point. But
no, not for that reason. I mean, I think you can, like, look, if I have a daughter who's 3 months old, she's a non-theist. You can fairly say that she's a non-theist, right?
Sure,
But she doesn't affirm theism. The fact that she doesn't know what theism is, right, doesn't mean she fails to be a non-theist.
Right,
she still qualifies. She satisfies the condition of being a non-theist. Why? Because theism is a concept that makes sense, right? There could be the concept of theism. Okay, I think is a coherent concept, right? Anyone who believes in a God, okay, that is, I think, a coherent concept. Even if nobody believed in a God, if every theist just killed themselves, or a meteor hits and it just happens to kill all the theists, okay, there's nothing but non-theists left, right? The term non-theism would still be meaningful, because the term theism, although there'd be no living theists around, the term theism would still make sense, right? It's still a thing, right?
sure.
And so the issue here isn't that non-cognitivists don't want to be subsumed under a certain label. They might not know enough about their own position and the landscape of positions to know where they should be subsumed under. Okay, what's wrong with putting them in the non-theist camp is that putting them in that camp denies what their position is. You put them in that position at the expense of recognizing what their position is. Their position is that non-theism doesn't make sense, right? It's just like if a person, if you said, look, is a 5-pointed star, is that symmetrical or non-symmetrical? And they said to you, there's no such thing as symmetry. That's a meaningless concept. Okay, look, you and I think symmetry is a meaningful concept, and consequently we think that something like asymmetry is a concept too, right? And the concept of asymmetry is parasitic on the concept of symmetry. But if someone believed that was meaningless blather, okay, then to say, well, look, you either think that with respect to this shape, you're either a symmetricist or an asymmetricist or a non-symmetricist with respect to this shape, and they'll say, I'm sorry, I can't be either, and neither can you. Nobody can, right? So that's the difficulty. It's not that they resist and don't want to be subsumed under that. People belong under the category that they belong under, as long as they satisfy certain conditions, right? And your condition is, look, if you're not a theist, then you're a non-theist, and you think that's the only condition. But no, that assumes that those terms are meaningful. Right? If I said you're either a Barbara Folks or you're not one of those things, right? That literally doesn't mean anything, right? I mean, I could assign a coherent meaning to it, but if there isn't a coherent meaning to it, then nobody is a theist, atheist, agnostic, or anything else in connection with.
It almost seems like, well, there are two consequences from this line of reasoning. It seems like now babies and rocks could also be theological non-cognitive.
Well, that's kind of, but I'm making that argument from a totally different earlier.
But that's what
I'm taking that from an
intentional. No, hang on. No, babies. I've been thinking about this. Babies and rocks can't be theological non-cognitivists. It occurs to me because I was sort of charmed by the idea at the beginning, but
no, I didn't say they could be theological non-cogs. What I wanted to argue is that they're like that because I was trying to run more of a photo type argument.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because these are intentional concepts, and
right.
they don't have the intentionality to pick and choose between one or the other.
Yeah, no, babies and rocks. It's one of those things. Sometimes you answer a question and you haven't had time to think about it. But I'm reflecting on it now. Babies and rocks can't be theological non-cognitivist, because theological non-cognitivist is a positive position. It is the positive position that all God talk is meaningless. And
they can't hold that positive position. And
babies and rocks can't have any such position, so they can't be theological non-cognitivists.
So if it's meaningless to you, but you have to hold the position. You have to hold the position of it being meaningless to you. Because I'm trying to understand the difference between. Let's say, for instance, when the scientists went down to the South America, I forget the rainforest, and they found that tribe, the one tribe that didn't even have a God concept, and they said, this is the tribe of atheists, because they had no God concept. So I would, and these were people. This would be, I would call, my understanding of the tribe of theological non-cognitivists. These people have no understanding, and this question is meaningless, this God concept. But all the literature was defining them as non-theist, or that set of not being theist. That was kind of, this is the tribe of atheists. But that's obviously that was in some of the journals and things.
Journals of cultural anthropology are not going to be weighing in on whether people are going to be called theological non-cognitivists or not.
I'm just trying to ask you, would that definition fit this particular group of people who had absolutely no concept?
It would really rest on what they believed. If they just are ignorant of all God concepts and don't think that it's meaningless, then they're not theological non-cognitivists. They're just non-theists.
Well, hang on, but Ozzy, what about?
But wait. But if they do think that the concepts are bogus, like if you present it to them and they go, "That's all nonsense. What are you people talking about?" And not that they think it's false, but they think it's meaningless. Okay, then they would be theological non-cognitivists. It seems very unlikely to me that people who have never heard of any God concepts are going to, before they hear it, formulate the idea that the concept is meaningless, because until they hear about it, they can't have the concept to think that it's meaningless. It's only once they are.
Okay, but hang on. I want to ask this real quick, because look, I agree. The babies and the rocks. Okay, there's not a positive claim. But what happens if you have somebody that is like a 2-year-old or something, and to them they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what God is. We could put the 2-year-old who does understand what a proposition is, maybe in their own way, but it's saying that proposition I don't think makes sense to me. I don't know what that is in their own way. Would they kind of be a theological non-cognitivist? They're positively saying this makes no sense, are they not? Now, I know I'm reading way into
possibly, but I think that you could, but I think that would be a real stretch, because theological non-cognitivist is supposed to be the position of a person who is familiar,
right? Okay,
with God talk, okay, and is not encountering it and going, "What the heck," right? But is rather familiar with these idioms and has judged them to be meaningless.
This is a position they've reached, not just a.
But Ozzy, it is sound like you're layering a little bit of meaning onto this meaningless concept. Like, they have to understand a lot about this concept.
No. All I mean by understand is that they have to be native speakers of the language and be familiar with the idioms and know how the words are used, and then still come to the conclusion that despite that people say, God is holy and God is great, and they don't go around saying things like God is a particle of sand and things like that, that they understand the range and limits of application of God talk. That's what's required. Okay, they don't have to be theologians, obviously, but they have to be native speakers of the language, or they have to have come from another culture and that didn't have that language, and then learn our language and then be fluent, right? In other words, they have to have competence with the language, so as to understand what God talk is, and then come to the conclusion that God talk is stupid talk, right?
I really got to wrap this up, guys. So next time, but I think that was a really good sussing that out. I think that was well worth it.
Yeah, can I just say something, MP? You and I have been talking about this for quite some time in Hangouts and stuff like that, with one another and with other people. And I have to say, this has been a really productive dialogue. We've disagreed an awful lot, but we've also converged on some things. But this has been really a lot of fun.
I like this one. This was good.
Really, I mean, a lot of people roll their eyes while they're having that conversation again. But the reason we keep having this conversation is because it actually is a conversation that matters. That's why it keeps coming up. It's, people say, well, it doesn't matter, but people get really get worked up about it on all sides, and that's why it keeps coming up. It's a perennial question, just like the question of God's existence is a perennial question. How to define these terms is something of a perennial question. And I have to say, I have really enjoyed our conversation. This has been like a really productive dialogue. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Yeah, the tones are really good.
But also,
MP's Mike the time too.
What MP?
No, I said no. I appreciate you guys even taking the time because sometimes you're right when especially when you come into one of these conversations, you already think you know what something is, and you're trying to argue from that position.
Right.
You're not really opening up your understanding to say, okay, why am I? So that's kind of how I wanted to try to approach today. Like, where am I being wrong? Where is my logic flawed? And if it's not, then how am I'm not understanding what the person's saying?
And I think you've got a really better conceptualization of it, because I mean, obviously you understand the set theory aspect of it. You totally got that down. So you just need to take into account what we're saying from the non-cog point of view. That's all. You just need to incorporate that. And I think you'll be golden.
Well, I think the difficulty here is from MP's standpoint, it looks to him like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, because I'm saying, listen, it's not fair to their position to call them non-theists. But at the same time, I'm also saying that they actually properly belong under non-theists. But when I'm saying that, I'm assuming that the question is meaningful, right? But I can form a kind of semantic assent, or I stand outside of my own commitments, my own commitment that the question of God's existence is meaningful. And when I do that, I see that, oh, well, actually, no, they would not actually be fairly characterized as non-theists, right? So within the scope of my assumption that the question of God's existence is a meaningful one that admits of a yes or no answer in principle, or an I don't know, an inconclusive, right? Then they belong under non-theism, right? But I also recognize that maybe they're right, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe the question is meaningless because God talk is meaningless. In which case, the theological non-cognitivists are right, and nobody is a non-theist. No one actually satisfies the description of non-theist.
I would love to find one argue that.
Yeah, there is an argument that I could submit to you, MP, that will work against what I'm saying here. What you could argue is this: a theist is not a person who believes there's a God. A person is merely someone who affirms there's a God, whether or not they believe it. Okay, so even if the concept is muddled, as long as they enter into a certain kind of talk, okay, then that's extensional. It's not. It doesn't rest on what they believe. You can define it purely extensionally, right? And then you could say, and anyone who doesn't affirm any God talk, irrespective of what they believe, okay, is a non-theist. So you could define theism not in terms of belief, right, or commitment, but merely public assertability. Okay, so if you define theism in terms of public assertability, or the failure to publicly assert theism, then the theological non-cognitivist is, under that definition, a non-theist. Okay, because that's an extensional definition. It doesn't rest on intentionality with an S. So
we're going to have a hangout on one of these. I think we're on the Great Debate Community channel. We might need to have a hang. I understand the differences pretty well now.
Yeah, okay.
I know it mathematically before, but now that I understand it with philosophy, they did. By the way, there is a correlation there. There really is. But,
yeah, well, they're part of the same concept, actually.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people don't get lost on those. If I wanted to find a set extensionally or intentionally, those are confusing concepts.
Yeah. But the idea is there's two ways to define to classify things. You can do it intentionally or extensionally.
Right.
If you do it extensionally, then theological non-cognitivist would be a non-theist. And then so would rocks and particles and the universe and everything that isn't a theist would become a non-theist. But the difficulty with that is that I think you'd have a clear win if you defined it extensionally.
Can I give a quick example, like mathematics, like how that would work?
Just give me a sec. Just let me get this out, and then. But the reason I wouldn't want to define these terms extensionally is because what we're trying to do is describe what people believe, irrespective of what they say. Because what people say doesn't always map to what they believe. People misdescribe themselves. People lie. It's BS. They burden shift and stuff like that. So I think what we're trying to do it's why it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that babies are atheists and rocks are atheists. We know, look, what we're talking about is what people think about the God question. So I think we wouldn't want to define things extensionally, but that would be a way that you could do it, is to define it extensionally.
Yeah, and let me run this by Ozzy. Look, if I wanted to find something intentionally with mathematics, I could just say a function is equal to the absolute function of x. That would be all positive numbers. If I want to do it extensionally, I could have a set that contained literally every positive number there is.
Right.
And but that's a lot more wieldy, right, to do it that way. But I would say, here's the set, and I have all the positive numbers in that set. I'm extensionally defining that set. Or I can just do it intentionally as the absolute value of x. And there can be different functions that map to the same value. I could actually have different ways of doing different functions that actually give like a same answer, but those are different intentional states.
I've got a simpler mathematical one. You can define a set this way. You could say the set of all even positive integers less than 10. So 2, 4, 6, 8. Right? That would be one way to define the set. And another way I could specify the same set is to simply list 2, 4, 6, 8. There you go. One is a description of that set, and the other is picks out the same set by literally picking out the individual members. Right? So the extensional one is the one that doesn't rest on a definition or a description. It just lists the members in the set.
Right.
2, 4, 6, 8. Is simply listing the members of the set, and that's what defines the set. The set 2, 4, 6, 8. There you go.
It's defined by the set.
Right, but there's another way to pick out 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's through a description. All of the positive even integers less than 10. There you go. Right.
Does that make sense, MP?
And the second one is an intentional one.
The only issue the only critique of this would be is that the way I'm evaluating the arguments that we are putting forward is in terms of what must be true based on one statement. So, for instance, if it must be true that if you say that you believe in a God, you believe that God exists, that must be true, then you are a theist. And then I'm trying to see what collateral effects that has on all other positions. And that's why I was asking about, that's kind of where I was getting to the theological non-cognitivists, even agnostics and even atheists, because by not affirming that position, it seemed to me that it must be true that if a theological non-cognitivist doesn't affirm theism, he is not that thing, no matter what no matter what we call it. And earlier, you guys defined that thing as non-theism. That's why I was using that.
Yeah, just from our
that's because we all agree that the question is
right. Because I personally believe that the proposition has meaning, so I can say that because the proposition has meaning, I would label theological non-cogs as non-theist. But as he said, you take that to semantic ascension approach and say, okay, for outside what I believe, the theological non-cog would be a third position. They would be the position of neither category. Neither things are even categories.
Well, I would disagree with that. I would think that to even be a theist or non-theist, you have to be a cognitivist. You couldn't be a non-cognitivist. That's if I'm understanding Ozzy's argument.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. You can't. Yeah, that's right. So from the standpoint of a cognitivist, there are two basic positions: theists and everybody else. Right. Everyone who isn't a theist. Right. So there's theist and non-theist. But from the standpoint of non-cognitivists, okay, there aren't any other positions. Those people think that they're espousing positions, but they're all talking. They're all going around calling themselves, Lemonists and non-Lemonists and pro-Lemonists and anti-Lemonists and para-Lemonists. And none of this makes any sense. None of this is all meaningless talk. And so that's that's how they see it. So if the three of us in this hangout right now are perfectly content to say the question is meaningful, and so everyone falls into one of two categories: theist or non-theist. And you can always, and I don't even think that's a fundamental analysis either, by the way. You could just as easily, let's say that theism is anyone who thinks there's a God. Theism is anyone who thinks there's a God. Atheism is anyone who thinks there's no God with any degree of confidence. little or a lot, right? And an agnostic is someone who's completely undecided. They just can't make up their mind. They think, well, maybe, maybe not. I can't decide. Just like, you want to go out for Chinese or Japanese food tonight. I can't make up my mind. They have no opinion on the matter. Okay, so you got three positions. Okay, you could break everybody down, if you're a cognitivist, into atheists, everyone who thinks that there isn't a God, and everybody else. And now the agnostics get subsumed in with the theists because agnostics don't affirm the non-existence of God, and neither do theists affirm the non-existence of God. So now the agnostics, fall under with the other camp. They are non-atheists, right? Or you could say, I'm going to break everybody down into agnostics and non-agnostics. So theists and atheists are non-agnostics. One group thinks there's a God, one group thinks there's no God, and everybody else, are the ones who are undecided. Those are the agnostics. So you could define everybody as either an agnostic or non-agnostic. So these are analytical distinctions, right? You can break things down into any. I could go around and say, I'm going to break everyone down into everyone who is an apatheist or not an apatheist, right? I mean, you could do that, right? So there's nothing critical about the way we split things up. The only reason we split things up the way we do, and inclined to start with the question, is there a God, or do you believe a God exists, and start our breakdown there, is because the entire discourse is fueled by people who believe there's a God. If we lived in a world where no one believed in a God, then we would find ourselves in a world where we don't have to have words like atheist and agnostic and theological non-cognitivist. The landscape of positions would disappear. Right? The landscape of positions arises as a byproduct, is parasitic upon the concept of there being a God and the fact that people believe in one.
Well, Ozzy, I was writing down just a couple of notes. When you made your distinction between theist, agnostic, and atheist, and you made the distinction that an agnostic person, someone who claims agnosticism, is technically a non-theist, but they would also be a non-atheist, which I agree with. They would actually hold both positions at the same time. They are non-atheist and non-theist. But then that would also, it seems like now that position of being an agnostic has blown up to subsume all these other positions that, and let's remove theological non-cognitivist, but every other position now is subsumed under the category of agnostic. So all these other,
right,
everything else would be, because they would all fit that criteria of being agnostic. They wouldn't be a theist and they wouldn't be an atheist. So they would technically be agnostic, and you can narrow them. But yet now you fit all the other theological positions under agnosticism because they all would be agnostic.
Okay, I think I either missed something at the beginning that's making this unclear to me, or we're disagreeing on what we mean by agnostic here. The way I'm using the word agnostic is not someone who merely has doubts or uncertainty about the question, but someone who's undecided, right? Who doesn't believe there's a God and doesn't believe that there's no God, right? In other words, there's a lot of people going around who call themselves atheists who are.
Let me tell you my definition, because I think this may be the confusion. My definition, because when you said earlier, you said an agnostic does not believe that a God exists, and an agnostic does not believe that a God does not exist. That's what I'm using as the definition. Right.
Yeah. And so that's going to subsume quite a lot of people, because I think the majority of people are agnostic nowadays in the Western world. I mean, we hear an awful lot about theists and how many there are and stuff like that. But in fact, I think the number of agnostics is huge.
I do too.
Yeah. So because if you're not an atheist or a theist, you are an agnostic, no matter what other position that you would espouse to have.
That's right. And then therefore you could put. And so, I mean, I'm inclined
theological non-cog.
Yeah. Well, no, but from my
standpoint,
standpoint, theological non-cognitivism doesn't make sense, right?
Right. No, I agree.
So because I think theological non-cognitive, but MP's drawing out an important implication here. Theological non-cognitivism, on my view, doesn't make sense. Okay. Consequently, they're non-theists. But what kind of non-theist are they? Well, they're the kind of theist. The kind of non-theist who doesn't think there's no God, and they don't think there's a God either. I think that theological non-cognitivists are really just agnostics with bad reasons for being agnostics.
I like that. Actually,
You can say that for all those positions, though. Any other position other than
I'll get behind
atheist
that.
or
Well, no,
agnostic.
I don't think atheists are agnostics, right?
No, I'm talking about everyone else except atheist and theist are technically agnostics for varying reasons.
Well, there aren't that many positions. In my view, you've got theological non-cognitivists, and then you've got theists and atheists, and then you've got agnostics. And atheist could be seen as a subcategory of theological non-cognitivism. Anti-theist is one that cuts across. You can be anti-theist and be a theist. That is, you can hate religion and think all religions are bad, and still believe that there's a God.
That's
right?
not a missile theist.
And can I get?
Well, no. That's not. You don't have to hate God. You just have to think that they're bad. Like Christopher Hitchens, for instance, was not just an atheist. He didn't just think that religions were all false. He thought that they were bad. And anti-theism is the view that religions is not. It's not that religions are false, although most anti-theists think that religions are false, and that's part of why they're bad. But they also just think that they're bad. That they inculcate bad values, bad morals, and they motivate people to be dogmatic, and they encourage dogmatism and stuff like that, right? There's a certain sense in which I fall under the description, not just of an atheist, but an anti-theist. I don't like the word and the label because of certain connotations, because a lot of anti-theists, I think, are jerks. And they're anti-theists not just because they're anti-theism, but they hate theists. And I don't hate theists. They're anti-theist. They're not anti-theism.
Yeah, they don't like
much.
the people, not the.
Yeah, I am anti-theism. I'm anti-theism. I'm not anti-theist. Yeah.
I said Steve's going to kill us because he keeps saying, we need to end. We need to end.
Okay. All right.
I know real quick. I was going to give a quick analogy before I take this off air. Maybe just real quick, if it makes sense to MP and to Ozzy. Look at theism, not theism. However, there's a position called deism that they sometimes argue doesn't quite fall into either one. However, of course, as I look at theism would be under a theist position. But to Dr. Kenny Rhodes, who's a PhD in philosophy in theology, he doesn't put deism under theism, because he's looking at theist from an interactive God that has to do something with us, not just a God that created the universe and moved on. So do you see the difference there? Because his version of theism is different than my version of theism. Although deism to me would be theism, deism to him is not theism. Does that make sense? Is that kind of Ozzy, is that way out there, or is that kind of similar in some ways?
Yeah, I understand it. I don't agree with it though, but I understand it.
Well, do you think where do you put deism? I put deism under theism, but he wouldn't.
Deism is because deism is it's the same question. I believe that deism is a subset of theism. But if
a theist is in a Christian viewpoint, if a theist is someone who believes in an interactive God, and you have deism, which is a non-interactive God, it would not fall under theism.
It's tricky because of the history of the word. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, theism is a kind of new word on the scene. I mean, believe it or not, atheism came first, and then theism. The word atheism was actually in usage for decades.
I actually looked that up, and that is actually true, which was kind of shocking. I was like, wow, this makes no sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. You just have to understand that.
No, I'm saying it doesn't make sense. Not that you don't make sense, but
no.
It, to me,
it's counterintuitive.
That word would come first.
Yeah,
it's counterintuitive. It makes sense.
It's counterintuitive because normally a word that starts with an A, a prefix with an A, is used to sort of counter. It's the negation or the privation or the absence or the lack of the other thing, right? And that's why people think that there's this etymological argument, atheism, the lack of theism, right? But that argument isn't. The etymological argument is actually junk. It's wrong. It's historically wrong. The atheism was actually coined first, was around for decades and decades and decades. And then once, there was atheism there, then someone said, okay, well, then we'll have theism. The reason there wasn't a word theism is because practically everyone was a theist. There was not a lot of need for the word theism, right? There was more need to pick out these weird people who didn't think that there was a God than to pick out, what everyone else was. So, I mean, it just, It's like, non-stamp collector. We don't need a word for non-stamp collector. We need a word for those rare people who collect stamps, not the vast majority of everyone who doesn't collect stamps. So atheism came first, and oh my goodness, I forgot where I was going with this. MP, what had you said that?
The history of theism and deism being under theism.
Oh, deism. Thank you.
Deism being under theism.
Yeah. Okay, so you have atheism gets coined, and then theism gets coined, and then you get this group of people, in the Enlightenment, who believe in a different kind of God. They believe in a God, right? But they believe in an impersonal God. Okay, this is a creator God, but it's a non-interventionist God. And it's usually a very dispassionate and impersonal God, right? Kind of the God that winds up the universe, creates the universe, winds it up and walks away, right? Is not invested, right? There's no point in praying to this God. This God's not listening. This God's not going to judge you and put you in heaven or hell. It's not that kind of God, right? It's just a creator, right? It's just like the programmer who programmed the universe and got it up and running. And maybe it looks on with interest there, or maybe not. The point is, it behaves dispassionately, and that this was a God that could be inferred by looking at the world through empiricism, through scientific means, right? You could look at the world and see the order, complexity, harmony, and design, and infer things about this creator. You couldn't infer a whole lot. So theologically, it's not a very rich concept. It's kind of an anemic God, if you ask me. But so this was called deism. They believed in a deity, and it was just kind of vague, right? And the idea was that this was a belief that was not based on creeds. It was not based on articles of faith or scripture. There was no dogma associated with it. It was all supposed to be a rational inference from looking at the world to a creator. A creator was inferable from this this world that we see around us. Okay, so it's supposed to be a kind of rational God, right, or rational philosophical position, right? But it wasn't a religion, okay? And it's a non-interventionist God, and so they wanted a different word. So they're saying, well, it's a deity, right? I mean, deity is a word that's been around for a long time, right? It just means a God. It's just another word, right? So instead of using the theos, or they called themselves deists, right? So theism in the philosophy of religion, theism refers to gods that aren't deistic gods, right? Theism refers to personal gods, gods of religions and stuff like that, monotheistic gods, polytheistic gods, whatever. But deism is this thing that I just described. So deism is defined over and against theistic conceptions of God. Deism is a specific conception of a God and an attitude towards that God that is different from the traditional religions of the world. And so in the philosophy, among ordinary people, we think of deism as a subspecies of theism. The deists believe in a God. Theists are people who believe in a God, therefore deists are theists, right? But deists don't like to be called theists because they want to remind people, no, you're going to confuse me with all them damn religious folks who believe in a theistic conception of God. So please don't call us theists. We took the name deism for a reason.
But you see my analogy there, Ozzy? Is that kind of,
Yeah.
Your analogy works, because it's a concept. Yeah. It's just a concept.
Okay, good. I didn't want to be too...
The belief. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be too far out there, but I thought that the whole deism thing was a good example of the theological non-cog.
Right.
It's a very similar situation, I thought.
Yes, it is. But I think that, most deists will concede, well, look, if by theist you mean anyone who believes in any kind of God, including my God, then yes, okay, I'm trivially a theist. But they will insist.
I had this discussion with Kenny. That's what I literally, in email, I was telling he was like, Steve, you're crazy. Deist or not theist? And I'm like, Kenny, I think you're crazy. Deist or theist?
Have him watch this little section where we talked about it.
Well, hang on, because he's a PhD, but me, if I think somebody is a little wrong, I want to challenge them politely, obviously, because I love Kenny. So we actually in a couple of emails back and forth, we sussed it out, and we're on the same page, right? He was like,
does he believe that deist or
looking at it from a Christian theological point of view?
Say that again, Steve.
He was looking at we sussed it out and everything's good now because he was like, oh, you know what, Steve, I see your point of view because you're looking at it from a strictly what his Christianity would preach. And you're right, deist under that thing would be theist. But under the way I understand Christianity as being Christian, that a theist is an interactive God and a deist is not interactive. A deist is not a theist. And I said, that makes sense to me, right? From your perspective, it wouldn't follow. From mine, it wouldn't follow. From his perspective, it's just a way of looking at it, right? That's it. Yeah. So I mean,
on that note of accord, I have to get going.
I have to get going too. All right, guys, thank you very much for wrapping this up. All I got to say is, hey, Sarah, hope you have a great shower and think of us. Peace.